Chapter 1. The Reclamation. Andromeda. Tonks could have turned around. She could have apparated home to her warm kitchen, where Ted was reading bedtime stories to Dora, and the kettle was probably still warm from dinner. She could have pretended the house elf hadn't whispered urgent words about babies and doorsteps and Albus Dumbledore making decisions that weren't his to make. But the cold November air bit at her face as she stood at the end of Privet Drive, and she could not make herself disappear. The street lay in unnatural darkness. Every lamp had been extinguished by whatever magic Dumbledore favored for his clandestine activities. Andromeda pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the glow emanating from number 4, where 3 figures stood in hushed conversation around something small and precious. "Professor Dumbledore," she said, her voice cutting through the night air like a blade through silk. The 3 figures turned. In the one light, she could make out Dumbledore's distinctive robes and beard, McGonagall's stern silhouette, and the towering form of Hagrid cradling a bundle that made her heart clench. A baby. Harry Potter. James and Lily's son, barely 15 months old and already orphaned by this bloody war. "Mrs. Tonks," Dumbledore said, and his tone suggested he had been expecting this confrontation. "I wondered if you might appear." "Did you?" Andromeda stepped closer, noting how McGonagall's lips had thinned to nearly invisible lines. "And yet you proceeded anyway with this placement." She looked past them to the dark windows of number 4 Privet Drive. No warmth glowed behind those curtains. No love waited on the other side of that door. She had made inquiries about Petunia Evans, now Dursley, years ago when Lily first married James. The information had been unpleasant enough that she had never pursued a relationship with her cousin-in-law's sister. "Harry will be safe here," Dumbledore said firmly. "The blood protection will function just as well in a home where he is wanted." Andromeda's voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her coat pocket for the papers Ted had helped her prepare. "I have guardianship claims, legal ones." McGonagall stepped forward, and her expression was sharper than winter wind. "Mrs. Tonks, surely you understand that the complexity of this situation. I understand that my husband and I are prepared to raise this child as our own," Andromeda interrupted. "I understand that we have a house with love in it, unlike these muggles who will see nothing but a burden when they find him on their doorstep." She looked directly at Dumbledore. "I also understand that my cousin Sirius named James Potter as his brother, which makes this boy family to me through more than just magical kinship bonds." Hagrid shifted the bundle in his arms, and a small sound escaped it. Not quite crying, but the whimper of a child who had been through far too much for someone so small. Andromeda's heart clenched tighter. "You cannot simply," Dumbledore began, but Andromeda cut him off. "Can I not? Sirius Black was named Harry's godfather. Before his arrest, he designated guardianship to fall to the closest available family member should anything happen to him. That would be me, as I am the only Black family member not imprisoned, dead, or married to a Death Eater." She held up the parchment. "I had Ted research both magical and Muggle guardianship law. The Dursleys have no legal claim to this child beyond blood relation. I have both magical law and family designation on my side." A crack of apparition announced Ted's arrival. He appeared beside Andromeda, slightly out of breath, but carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. "Sorry I'm late, love. Dora insisted on coming along." He gestured behind him, where 8-year-old Nymphadora materialized from beneath a disillusionment charm, her hair shifting nervously from brown to auburn. "Watcher," Dora said quietly, her eyes fixed on the bundle in Hagrid's arms. "Is that him? Is that Harry?" Dumbledore's expression grew more grave as he took in the sight of the Tonks family united on this dark street. "This is highly irregular. So is placing a child with relatives who despise magic without consulting anyone," Ted said mildly. but there was steel underneath his polite tone. "I've brought documentation from both the Ministry's Department for Magical Children and the Muggle Social Services regarding proper placement procedures. Would you like to review them, Headmaster?" McGonagall exchanged a look with Dumbledore that Andromeda couldn't quite interpret. "The blood protection," McGonagall began. "Will hold," Andromeda said firmly. "I am a Black by birth, connected to Harry through the family tapestry. More importantly, I am willing to love him." She looked at the dark windows of number 4 again. "Tell me truthfully, Professor Dumbledore, when you place him on that doorstep tonight, will he wake tomorrow morning to people who are happy to see him?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dora stepped closer to Hagrid, her eyes wide with curiosity, and something deeper, a protectiveness that reminded Andromeda powerfully of herself at that age. "He's so small," Dora whispered. "Can I see him properly?" Hagrid looked to Dumbledore, who after a long moment nodded slightly. Hagrid knelt down, bringing the bundle closer to Dora's eye level. She reached out with one tentative finger to touch the edge of the blanket. "Hello, Harry," she said softly. "I'm Dora. I'm going to be your big sister, if you'd like." As if in response, the baby's eyes opened, bright green and already too wise for such a small face. He looked directly at Dora, and she smiled, her hair shifting to a warm golden color that matched the streetlight. "He likes me," Dora announced with satisfaction. "Can we take him home now, Mum?" Andromeda felt something settle in her chest, a rightness that had been missing since she heard about James and Lily's deaths. This was where Harry belonged, not on a cold doorstep, but in the arms of family who would choose to love him every single day. "Professor Dumbledore," she said, her voice gentler now but no less determined. "Harry Potter deserves to grow up knowing he is wanted. He deserves bedtime stories and birthday cakes, and someone who will teach him that his magic is a gift, not a burden. I can give him those things." "And if I refuse?" Dumbledore asked quietly. Ted stepped forward, his portfolio still in hand. "Then tomorrow morning, both the Ministry and Muggle authorities will receive documentation about the irregular placement of a magical child with non-magical relatives who have no legal guardianship rights. I've been quite thorough in my research." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, studying the Tonks family with those penetrating blue eyes. Finally, he sighed. "The boy will still face danger. Voldemort may return. His followers will not forget. Then he'll face it with family beside him," Andromeda said simply. "As it should be." McGonagall cleared her throat. "There will be conditions, regular check-ins, protective wards. The child's safety must be paramount." "Agreed," Andromeda said immediately. "We want him protected. We want him loved." Dumbledore looked once more at the dark windows of number 4, then at Dora, who had managed to coax a small smile from baby Harry. "Very well," he said finally. "But Mrs. Tonks, if anything happens to this child—" "It won't," Ted said firmly. "We'll make sure of it." Hagrid stood slowly, and with obvious reluctance, placed the bundle into Andromeda's waiting arms. Harry looked up at her with those impossibly green eyes, and she felt the same fierce protectiveness she had experienced the day Dora was born. "Welcome home, Harry," she whispered. The walk back to their house through the November darkness felt like a triumphant procession. Dora chattered excitedly about showing Harry his room, the spare bedroom they had hastily transfigured into a nursery earlier that evening, while Ted discussed feeding schedules and the need to contact St. Mungo's for a complete health evaluation. But Andromeda barely heard them. She was focused on the child in her arms, this small person who had already survived more trauma than most adults would face in a lifetime. Harry had fallen asleep during the walk, his head tucked against her shoulder, completely trusting, despite having known her for mere minutes. When they reached their front garden, warm light spilled from the windows onto the path. Ted had left lamps burning in every room. a beacon of welcome for their newest family member. As they crossed the threshold, Harry stirred but didn't wake, and Andromeda knew with absolute certainty that they had done the right thing. This was where he belonged. This was where he would be loved. In the kitchen, still warm. From dinner, they sat around the scrubbed wooden table while Harry slept peacefully in Andromeda's arms. Dora made a cup of weak tea with more enthusiasm than skill. Ted conjured a proper baby bottle for when Harry woke hungry, and Andromeda simply held him, marveling at how completely he already fit into their family. "Tomorrow I'll owl Mum and Dad," Ted said quietly. "They'll want to meet their new grandson. And I'll start researching early childhood magical development," Andromeda added. "He'll need proper guidance as his abilities manifest." Dora leaned forward, her chin propped on her hands as she studied Harry's sleeping face. "Do you think he'll like chocolate frogs? I've been saving mine from honeydukes." "I think," Andromeda said, smoothing a hand over Harry's dark hair, "he'll like whatever you choose to share with him." Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, but inside their small house, warmth settled around them like a protective charm. Harry Potter was home at last, and he would never again wake up alone. Chapter 2. New Rhythms. By February, the Tonks household had settled into patterns that felt as natural as breathing. Harry's crib had migrated from the hastily transfigured nursery into Dora's room, where she insisted he belonged so she could keep watch over him proper-like. Andromeda had given up arguing after the third night she found her daughter curled up on the floor beside Harry's crib, unwilling to let him sleep alone. This morning was no different. Andromeda climbed the stairs with Harry's bottle, expecting to find both children still asleep, but instead discovered Dora sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, with Harry propped between her knees, both of them babbling at each other in what sounded like a private language. "He's trying to tell me something important, Mum," Dora said without looking up. Her hair had shifted to match Harry's exact shade of black overnight, complete with a small cowlick that mirrored his. "I think he wants to walk today." "Does he now?" Andromeda set the bottle on Dora's nightstand and knelt beside them. Harry looked up at her with bright green eyes and made an urgent sound, pointing toward the doorway. "See? He's got plans." Dora scrambled to her feet and held out her hands. "Come on then, Harry. Let's show Mum how clever you are." Harry grabbed onto Dora's fingers with the determination of someone who had been practicing this particular skill for weeks, which, Andromeda realized, he probably had been. She watched as her daughter coaxed Harry to his feet, then slowly backed away, maintaining the gentle grip that kept him steady. "Just like yesterday," Dora murmured encouragingly. "One foot, then the other." "That's brilliant!" Harry took a wobbling step forward, then another. His face scrunched with concentration, and for a moment Andromeda thought he might sit down heavily, as he usually did. Instead, he let go of Dora's hands entirely, and took 3 unsteady but unmistakable steps across the space between them. "Mum!" Dora's shriek of excitement would have woken the entire neighborhood if their wards hadn't been soundproofed. "He did it! Harry walked!" Harry, startled by the volume, plopped down hard on his bottom, but immediately started clapping his hands in imitation of Dora's enthusiastic applause. His delighted giggle filled the room, and Andromeda felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Well done, sweetheart," she said, scooping Harry up for a congratulatory cuddle. "Such a big boy." The morning celebration was interrupted by the sharp crack of an owl at the kitchen window. Andromeda's stomach tightened. Official owls still made her nervous, even 3 months after Harry's placement. Too many of them had carried ministry correspondence, questioning their guardianship arrangements. "I'll get it," Ted called from downstairs, his voice carefully neutral. He had developed the same wariness around official correspondence. Dora bounced on her toes, still glowing with pride over Harry's achievement. Can we owl Grandad and tell him? He'll want to know Harry's walking now. After breakfast, Andromeda promised, though her attention was split between Harry's babbling and the sound of Ted's footsteps on the stairs. His expression when he appeared in the doorway confirmed her fears. "Ministry again?" she asked quietly. "Department for Magical Children." Ted held up the official parchment. "They want to schedule another welfare evaluation. Apparently there have been additional concerns raised about the irregularity of Harry's placement." Andromeda felt something sharp and protective flare in her chest. "Whose concerns?" "It doesn't specify, but I suspect our friend the headmaster hasn't given up entirely." Ted sat down heavily on Dora's bed, suddenly looking older than his years. "They're questioning whether we can provide adequate magical education and security." "That's ridiculous," Dora said hotly. "Harry's the happiest baby in Britain. Anyone with eyes can see that." "Unfortunately, bureaucrats don't always trust their eyes," Ted said with a wry smile. "They prefer forms and regulations." Harry, oblivious to the tension, had begun practicing his new walking skills by todding between the bed and the dresser with single-minded determination. Each successful trip earned him a small cheer from Dora, who had apparently appointed herself his personal cheerleading squad. "What do we need to do?" Andromeda asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Make it official through Muggle channels," Ted said. "Full legal adoption. If we have Muggle legal guardianship, it becomes much harder for the Ministry to question our authority." Andromeda nodded. She had expected this conversation for weeks. "How long will it take?" "With my connections in the family court, probably 6 to 8 weeks. But Andromeda," Ted's voice carried a note of warning. "Once we file the paperwork, we're committed. Harry will legally be our son in both worlds." "Good," Andromeda said firmly. "He already is." That afternoon, while Ted disappeared into his study to draft adoption papers, Andromeda found herself watching Dora attempt to teach Harry advanced baby skills in the sitting room. Current lesson: how to properly destroy a tower of blocks for maximum entertainment value. No, Harry," Dora said patiently, as Harry gently pushed one block off the pile. "You've got to knock them all down at once. Like this," she demonstrated with theatrical enthusiasm, sending blocks flying in all directions. Harry clapped and immediately began rebuilding the tower with the focused determination that seemed to characterize everything he did. Watching him, Andromeda marveled at how completely he had integrated into their family. There was no hesitation in the way he reached for Dora when he wanted comfort, no wariness when Ted appeared with his afternoon snack. 3 months had been enough to convince him that this was where he belonged. "Dora, love," Andromeda said as Harry successfully reconstructed his tower. "Can you watch Harry for a moment while I start dinner?" "Course." Dora didn't look up from her serious discussion with Harry about proper block-knocking technique. "We're busy being architectural engineers." Andromeda was halfway to the kitchen when she heard Dora's frustrated sigh, followed by an odd silence. She turned back to find her daughter staring at Harry with her mouth hanging open. "Mum," Dora said in a strangled voice. "Mum, come look at this." Andromeda hurried back to find Harry sitting contentedly amid his blocks. But his hair had shifted from black to the exact shade of brown that Dora's had been that morning. As she watched, his features seemed to subtly rearrange themselves until he looked like a smaller, masculine version of her daughter. "I was trying to make him laugh," Dora whispered. "I kept changing my hair color, but he looked sad instead of happy. So I thought maybe if I tried to look like him." She gestured helplessly at her own face, which now bore an unmistakable resemblance to Harry's usual appearance. But then he started changing too. Harry looked between them with perfect contentment, apparently unaware that he had just demonstrated metamorphmagus abilities at 18 months old, several years before such talents typically manifested. "Well," Andromeda said faintly, "that's unexpected." "Is it normal?" Dora asked anxiously. "I mean, I know I'm a metamorphomagus, but I didn't start changing properly until I was 4, and I've never seen anyone else do it with me." Andromeda knelt down beside Harry, studying his transformed features with fascination and a touch of concern. "I don't think anything about Harry is going to be entirely normal, sweetheart. But this isn't necessarily worrying." As if in response to her voice, Harry's appearance slowly shifted back to his usual self, though his hair remained the warm brown shade that matched Dora's natural color. He looked pleased with this development and clapped his hands. "Maybe he likes looking like family," Dora suggested softly. "Maybe it makes him feel like he belongs." Andromeda felt something melt in her chest. "You might be right about that." Dinner that evening was a triumph of domestic normalcy, despite the day's revelations. Harry sat in his high chair, successfully managing to get most of his mashed vegetables into his mouth rather than his hair, while Dora entertained him with increasingly ridiculous facial expressions. Ted had emerged from his paperwork long enough to share the news that the adoption process was already underway. "My solicitor friend thinks we have excellent grounds," he said between bites of Andromeda's shepherd's pie, "especially given the lack of proper placement procedures last November." "What about the magical concerns?" Andromeda asked, bouncing Harry gently when he started to fuss. "We document everything," Ted said simply. "Harry's magical development, his happiness, his health. We show them a family that works." Harry chose that moment to successfully get an entire spoonful of mashed carrot into his mouth without assistance, then beam proudly at his accomplishment. Orange vegetable decorated his cheeks, but his smile was radiant. "See," Dora said triumphantly. "He's brilliant. Anyone who can't see that is mental." "Language, young lady," Andromeda said automatically, but she was smiling. As they cleaned up after dinner, Harry's exhaustion began to show. He grew increasingly clingy, reaching for whichever adult was closest and making the soft whimpering sounds that indicated bedtime was approaching. Dora, ever attentive to his moods, started humming the lullaby Andromeda had taught her, a black family melody that Andromeda's own mother had sung decades ago. "Come on then, Harry," Dora said gently, lifting him from his high chair. "Time for stories and sleep." Andromeda watched her daughter carry Harry upstairs, chattering softly about which book they should read first, and felt a deep contentment settle in her bones. 3 months ago, she had acted on instinct and desperation, determined to save Harry from a loveless placement. Now, watching Dora tuck him into his crib with the practiced efficiency of an experienced big sister, Andromeda realized they had all been saved. Ted appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist as they listened to Dora's voice drifting down from upstairs, reading the tale of the 3 brothers in dramatic whispers. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Andromeda leaned against his shoulder, thinking of Harry's first steps, his metamorphomagus display, his delighted giggles during dinner. "None whatsoever." Upstairs, Harry's soft breathing indicated he had fallen asleep to the sound of his sister's voice, safe and loved and completely unaware of the bureaucratic battles being fought over his future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new ministry correspondence, new questions about proper placement and adequate care. But tonight, he was simply part of a family that had rearranged itself around him as naturally as water flowing around stones. And that, Andromeda thought as she turned off the sitting room lights, was exactly as it should be. Chapter 3. Growing Magic. By the time Harry turned 4, the Tonks household had developed an intricate system of magical containment that would have impressed even the Ministry's Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Not that Harry was a creature, of course, but his magical outbursts had begun to require similar levels of careful management. The latest incident had occurred that morning during breakfast, when Harry's porridge had spontaneously transformed into a flock of paper birds that proceeded to dive-bomb Dora's eggs. The spell had been so complex so perfectly executed that even Andromeda had stared in stunned silence for a full minute before vanishing the magical constructs. "Harry, love," she said gently, crouching down to his eye level as he sat in his booster seat, looking as surprised as anyone. "Do you remember thinking about birds just now?" Harry nodded solemnly, his green eyes weighed with the particular intensity he got when trying to explain something important. Dora was telling about her transfiguration essay. I wanted to make her smile. 12-year-old Dora, who had indeed been grumbling about Professor McGonagall's impossible expectations for second-year students, looked up from her now bird-free breakfast with a mixture of affection and exasperation. "You don't have to fix everything with magic, Harry." "But I can," Harry said simply, and there was something in his tone that made Andromeda's stomach clench with worry. That afternoon, Andromeda sat in their back garden with both children, a collection of magical theory books spread across the old wooden table Ted had built years ago. The spring air was warm enough for shirt sleeves, and Harry sat cross-legged on his cushion, completely absorbed in a picture book about magical creatures that was supposedly meant for children twice his age. "Right," Andromeda said, opening A Beginner's Guide to Magical Theory to a page she had bookmarked. "Today we're going to talk about intent and accidental magic." Dora groaned dramatically. "Mum, I already know this. I've been at Hogwarts for 2 years. Yes, but Harry needs to learn it, and sometimes teaching someone else helps reinforce your own understanding." Andromeda gave her daughter a meaningful look. "Besides, your control could still use some work. I saw you turn your hair green during breakfast because you were annoyed." "That was intentional," Dora protested, then caught her mother's expression. "Mostly." Harry looked up from his book, where an illustrated dragon was breathing tiny puffs of real fire across the page. "Is accidental magic when you don't mean to do it, but it happens anyway?" "Exactly," Andromeda said, pleased. "All young witches and wizards have accidental magic episodes. It's completely normal. What's unusual is the complexity and power level of your incidents, sweetheart." She had been researching this topic extensively since Harry's latest display. Accidental magic in 4-year-olds typically consisted of floating objects, changing hair color, or maybe making flowers bloom. Harry's magical outbursts were approaching newt-level sophistication, and that worried her more than she wanted to admit. "The important thing," she continued, "is learning to recognize the feeling that comes before the magic, so you can control it before it controls you." Harry considered this seriously. "It feels like bubbles in my chest, warm bubbles that want to come out." Dora leaned forward with interest. "That's not how mine feels. Mine is more like electricity in my fingertips." "Everyone experiences magic differently," Andromeda explained. "The key is recognizing your personal warning signs." Their lesson was interrupted by the sound of voices from the front garden, older children, probably from the secondary school down the road. Andromeda frowned. They rarely had visitors during the day, and these voices carried an unpleasant edge. "Dora Tonks!" one of them called out, mockingly. "Come out here, freak!" Dora's face went pale, and her hair immediately darkened to black, her stress response. "I should go inside," she said quietly. "Who are they?" Harry asked, his small hands clenching into fists. "Just some boys from school," Dora said, trying for casual but failing. "They think I'm weird because of the hair thing. It's fine." "It's not fine," Harry said with the fierce intensity he reserved for serious injustices. The warm bubbles in his chest were clearly building, and Andromeda could feel the magic radiating from him like heat from a fire. "Harry," she said quickly, "remember what we just talked about." But it was too late. The voices outside had turned crueler, and one of the boys was describing exactly what he thought should be done to freaks like her. Harry's magic erupted outward with the force of a small explosion. Every window in the neighboring houses slammed shut simultaneously. The boys' voices rose in panic as their shoes suddenly became too slippery to stand in, sending them tumbling into Mrs. Henderson's prized rose bushes. The garden gate locked itself with an audible click, trapping them inside the thorny embrace of the roses, while a swarm of actual bees, summoned from somewhere unknown, began circling their heads with menacing precision. "Harry!" Andromeda grabbed her son's shoulders, trying to ground him before his magic could escalate further. "That's enough!" Harry blinked, the furious green fire in his eyes dimming as he registered her voice. Immediately the bees dispersed, the gate unlocked, and the boys' shoes returned to normal. They fled down the street with considerably more speed than dignity. "Well," Dora said faintly, "that was thorough." Harry looked between them anxiously. "Are you angry?" They were being mean to Dora. Andromeda gathered him into her arms, her heart still racing from the sheer power she had felt rolling off her 4-year-old son. "I'm not angry that you wanted to protect your sister. But Harry, you could have seriously hurt those boys." "They were trying to hurt Dora with words," Harry said stubbornly. "Words hurt too." The simple truth of that statement made Andromeda's chest ache. How did you explain the complexities of proportional response to a 4-year-old who had more magical power than most adult wizards? That evening, after Harry had been tucked into bed with extra stories and reassurances, Andromeda found Ted in his workshop, sawing planks with more force than strictly necessary. Wood shavings covered every surface, and she could see the beginning framework of what looked like a very ambitious construction project. "Treehouse?" she asked, settling onto his work stool. "Treehouse," Ted confirmed, not looking up from his measuring. "Somewhere he can practice magic without the neighbors calling the police about unusual weather phenomena." Andromeda watched him work, noting the careful precision of his cuts, the way he checked and double-checked each measurement. Ted approached everything, from magical adoption paperwork to treehouse construction, with the same methodical thoroughness that made him such a good father. "The boys today," she said carefully. Harry's response was, "completely disproportionate and absolutely justified," Ted finished. "I know. I've been thinking about it all afternoon. His power levels are getting stronger, and his emotional triggers are becoming more explosive." Ted set down his saw and finally looked at her. "What are you really worried about, Andromeda? That he'll hurt someone, or that someone will notice how powerful he is?" The question hung in the air between them. Andromeda thought about Harry's innocent face as he described the warm bubbles that preceded his magic, the casual way he had summoned a swarm of bees to defend his sister, the complex transfiguration he had performed on breakfast porridge. "Both," she admitted. "If the ministry gets wind of this—" "Then we make sure they don't," Ted said simply. "We teach him control. We give him safe spaces to practice. We love him through it." 2 days later, the treehouse was finished. Ted had outdone himself. It was a proper structure with windows, a small deck, and privacy wards that would contain any magical outbursts while allowing the children to practice freely. Harry had watched every stage of construction with fascination, occasionally offering suggestions that Ted took with admirable seriousness. "The ladder rungs should be closer together," Harry had observed on the second day. "Dora's legs are longer than mine." "You're absolutely right," Ted had said, adjusting the spacing accordingly. Now, as Andromeda watched from the kitchen window, Harry and Dora were christening their new sanctuary with what appeared to be a shape-shifting contest. Harry's metamorph magus abilities had continued to develop alongside his other magical talents, and he seemed to find it easier to control when he was practicing alongside Dora. "Look, Harry," she heard Dora call out. "If you concentrate really hard on feeling peaceful, the change happens more smoothly." Harry's hair shifted from its usual black to a soft brown, and his features refined themselves to match Dora's current appearance more closely. "Like this? Perfect. Now try changing back while thinking about something that makes you happy." Andromeda smiled as Harry's appearance flickered back to normal, his face bright with pleasure at his success. Dora had appointed herself his unofficial metamorph magus instructor with the same fierce protectiveness she had shown since the day they brought him home. "He's getting better at it," Ted observed, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. "The control exercises are helping." "Dora's a natural teacher," Andromeda agreed. "She has patience with him that she doesn't show for anything else." They watched as the children moved on to what appeared to be a lesson in controlled levitation. Harry was attempting to float a small wooden block between his hands, while Dora coached him through breathing exercises. "The treehouse was perfect," Andromeda said. "Exactly what he needed." Ted slipped an arm around her waist. "What they both needed. Dora's magic is stronger when she's teaching him. It gives her focus." It was true. Dora's own abilities had stabilized significantly since she had taken on the role of Harry's mentor and protector. The constant hair color changes that marked her stress responses had become less frequent, and her shape-shifting had gained precision and control. "Do you think he'll be ready for Hogwarts?" Andromeda asked quietly. "When the time comes?" Ted was quiet for a long moment, watching Harry successfully levitate the wooden block in a perfect circle around Dora's head while she clapped encouragement. "I think," he said finally, "that by the time Harry gets to Hogwarts, they'll need to be ready for him." That night, Andromeda tucked both children into their beds. Harry had long since moved back into his own room, though he still preferred to sleep with his door open so he could hear Dora if she needed him. She found him sitting up in bed, looking thoughtful in the way that usually preceded difficult questions. "Mum," he said as she settled beside him, "am I dangerous?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "Harry, love, what makes you ask that?" "The boys today. They were scared of me after the magic happened, and sometimes I feel the bubbles getting really big, and I think about what would happen if I couldn't make them stop." Andromeda gathered him into her arms, feeling the weight of responsibility settle around her shoulders like a cloak. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that yes, he was potentially dangerous, but that danger didn't make him bad? "Everyone has the potential to be dangerous, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Even people without magic. What matters is what you choose to do with your power. Like how Dad chooses to build tree houses instead of breaking things. Exactly like that." Andromeda smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her fingers brushing the lightning bolt scar that had faded but never disappeared. "You have big magic, Harry, but you also have a big heart. As long as your heart guides your magic, you'll be fine." Harry considered this seriously. "And if my heart gets confused sometimes, then you have Dora and Dad and me to help you remember which way is right." He nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and settled back against his pillows. "Mum, will you sing the Star Song?" Andromeda smiled and began the old black family lullaby, watching as Harry's eyes grew heavy with sleep. Outside, the treehouse stood silhouetted against the evening sky, a promise of safe spaces and controlled practice, of family love strong enough to guide even the most powerful magic toward the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new magical outbursts to manage, new lessons in control and restraint. But tonight, her son was safe and loved, and learning that his strength could be a gift rather than a burden. And that, she thought, as Harry's breathing settled into sleep, was exactly as it should be. Chapter 4. Family Secrets. The question came on a rainy Saturday morning in October, while Harry sat at the kitchen table methodically working through his reading exercises. At 6, he approached learning with the same intense focus he brought to everything else, tongue poking out slightly in concentration, green eyes tracking each word with deliberate precision. "Mum," he said, without looking up from his book, "why don't I remember my first parents?" Andromeda's hands stilled on the breakfast dishes. Beside Harry, 14-year-old Dora looked up sharply from her potions essay, her hair unconsciously darkening to black. Her stress response hadn't changed, even after 4 years at Hogwarts. What brought that on, sweetheart? Andromeda asked carefully, settling into the chair across from him. Harry finally looked up, and his expression carried that particular earnestness that always reminded Andromeda so powerfully of Lily Potter. Tommy Richardson at the library yesterday. His mum was telling him stories about when he was little, how he used to throw all his food on the floor and try to eat the cat's biscuits. He asked me what funny things I did when I was little, and I realized— Harry paused, searching for the right words. I don't have any stories from before I lived here. I don't remember them at all. The simple honesty of it hit Andromeda like a physical blow. Of course he didn't remember Rosato, James, and Lily. He had been only 15 months old when they died, barely walking, certainly too young to retain conscious memories. But the absence of those memories, the blank space where his earliest years should have been, must feel strange to a child intelligent enough to notice the gap. That's because you were very little when you came to live with us, Andromeda said gently. Babies don't usually remember much from their first year or two. But Tommy remembers things from when he was 2, and Sarah at the park remembers her 2nd birthday party. Harry's brow furrowed with the particular intensity he got when working through a problem. Was there something wrong with me? Is that why my first parents couldn't keep me? Oh, Harry. Andromeda reached across the table to take his hands. There was absolutely nothing wrong with you. Your first parents loved you very much. They couldn't keep you because they died. The word hung in the air like a weight. Harry absorbed it with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to everything, his green eyes searching her face for additional information. How did they die? He asked quietly. Andromeda looked at Dora, who had abandoned all pretense of working on her essay and was watching this conversation with the same fierce protectiveness she had shown Harry since the day he arrived. That, Andromeda said carefully, is a longer story. Are you sure you're ready to hear it? Harry nodded, with the gravity of someone much older than 6. I want to know about them, about where I came from. Ted appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the unusual quiet. He took in the scene. Harry's earnest face, Dora's protective posture, Andromeda's careful composure, and immediately understood what was happening. Right then, he said, settling into the 4th chair. Family meeting, is it? Harry's asking about his birth parents, Andromeda said quietly. Ted nodded, as if he had been expecting this conversation for months, which Andromeda realized he probably had. Well, that's a story worth telling properly. Dora, put the kettle on, would you? This might take a while. 20 minutes later, they were settled in the sitting room with tea and biscuits, Harry curled between Andromeda and Ted on the sofa, while Dora claimed the armchair, her hair still dark, but her posture attentive rather than anxious. Your birth parents, Andromeda began, were named James and Lily Potter. They were brave, good people who fought against a very dangerous, dark wizard during a war that was happening when you were born. Like the wars in Dad's history books? Harry asked. Similar. But this was a magical war, Ted said. The dark wizard, his name was Voldemort, believed that people like your dad, who came from Muggle families, shouldn't be allowed to use magic. He wanted to hurt or kill anyone who disagreed with him. Harry considered this seriously. That's stupid. Dad does brilliant magic, and he's from a Muggle family. Exactly, Dora said firmly, which is why your parents and lots of other people fought against Voldemort. They knew he was wrong. Your father James was my cousin Sirius's best friend, Andromeda continued. They were like brothers, and your mother Lily was one of the cleverest witches of her generation. They fought in the war because they wanted to make a world where you could grow up safe and free. What happened to them? Harry asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Andromeda took a careful breath. Voldemort came to your house on Halloween night in 1981. Your parents tried to protect you, but they weren't strong enough to stop him. They died defending you. But Voldemort didn't succeed in killing you, Ted added quickly, seeing Harry's face pale slightly. Something about your parents' protection meant that when he tried to hurt you, his own spell backfired. He was destroyed instead, and you survived with just that small scar on your forehead. Harry's hand drifted unconsciously to his scar, fingers tracing the lightning bolt shape that had always been there, as much a part of him as his green eyes or unruly hair. "That's why you're famous in the magical world," Dora said gently. "You're the boy who lived when the worst dark wizard in a century couldn't kill you. People call you the boy who lived." Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same methodical thoroughness he applied to everything else. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than usual. "Are people going to expect things from me? Because of what happened?" The question was so perceptive, so aware of the complexities that fame could bring, that Andromeda felt her heart clench. At 6 years old, Harry was already understanding that being famous might not be entirely pleasant. "Some people might," she said honestly. "That's why we've never told anyone your real name when we're out in the Muggle world. You're just Harry Tonks to your friends and teachers." "Good," Harry said, with surprising firmness. "I don't want to be famous. I want to be normal." "You'll never be completely normal, love," Ted said with a gentle smile. "You're too special for that. But you can choose what kind of special you want to be." "What about Sirius?" Harry asked suddenly. "You said he was my dad's best friend. Where is he?" This was the question Andromeda had been dreading. She looked at Dora, who straightened in her chair with a familiar stubborn set to her jaw. "Sirius is in prison," Andromeda said carefully. "He was arrested the night after your parents died." "Did he do something bad?" "The Ministry believes he betrayed your parents to Voldemort," Andromeda said. "They think he told Voldemort where to find them." Harry frowned deeply. But if he was Dad's best friend, why would he do that? "He wouldn't," Dora said fiercely. "I don't care what the Ministry says. Sirius Black wouldn't betray his best mate. Someone made a mistake, or someone lied, or something else happened. But he didn't do it." Andromeda felt a surge of pride at her daughter's certainty. Dora had never met Sirius. He had been imprisoned when she was 8. But she had heard enough stories about him to be absolutely convinced of his innocence. "How do you know?" Harry asked, looking between them. "Because I knew him before the war," Andromeda said quietly. "Sirius was my favorite cousin. He was impulsive, yes, reckless, certainly. But he was also loyal to his bones. He would have died before betraying James Potter. So why is he in prison?" "Because the wizarding justice system is rubbish," Dora said bluntly, earning a mild look of reproach from Ted. "What? It is. They threw him in Azkaban without even giving him a proper trial." "Azkaban?" Harry's voice was very quiet now. "The magical prison," Andromeda explained. "It's not a pleasant place. The guards are creatures called Dementors that feed on happy thoughts and hope." Harry absorbed this information with growing horror. "So Sirius is in a horrible prison for something he didn't do?" "Yes," Andromeda said simply. "That's not fair." "No," Ted agreed. "It's not." Harry was quiet for several minutes, staring at his hands folded in his lap. When he looked up again, his green eyes held a determination that reminded Andromeda powerfully of both James and Lily Potter. "When I grow up," he said with absolute certainty, "I'm going to prove he didn't do it." "We're going to prove it," Dora corrected firmly. "I'm going to be an Auror when I finish Hogwarts. That means I'll be able to investigate crimes and catch real bad wizards. I'll find proof that Sirius is innocent." "Can girls be Aurors?" Harry asked with interest. "Girls can be anything," Dora said, with the confidence of someone who had never been told otherwise. "Mum could have been an Auror if she'd wanted. She's brilliant at defensive magic." "I wanted a quieter life," Andromeda said with a smile. "But I'm very proud that you want to seek justice for people who've been wronged." "So am I," Ted added. "It's exactly what your birth parents would have wanted. People standing up for what's right." That afternoon, while Harry napped, the emotional weight of the conversation had exhausted him more than he wanted to admit. Andromeda found herself in the garden with Dora, helping harvest the last of the autumn vegetables. "Do you really think we can prove Sirius is innocent?" Dora asked quietly, pulling carrots with more force than strictly necessary. "I don't know," Andromeda admitted, "but I think we have to try, for Harry's sake and for Sirius's. He's going to want to visit him, isn't he, when he's older?" Andromeda paused in her potato digging. She hadn't considered that possibility, but of course Harry would want to meet the man who had been his father's best friend, who should have been his godfather. "Probably," she said finally. "Would that bother you?" "No," Dora said immediately. "I want to meet him too. I want to hear stories about what Dad was really like from someone who knew him properly." That evening, as they prepared Harry for bed, he asked one final question that caught Andromeda completely off guard. "Mum, when I start school next year, can we not tell anyone about the famous thing, or about my real name?" "Of course," Andromeda said. "But Harry, you know you don't have to be ashamed of who you are." "I'm not ashamed," Harry said seriously. "I'm proud that my first parents were brave. But I want people to like me for me, not because of something that happened when I was a baby." Andromeda tucked him in with extra care that night, her heart full of pride for this small boy who was already wise enough to understand that fame was not the same as worth. As she turned off his light, Harry spoke once more into the darkness. "Mum, I'm glad you took me home that night. I'm glad I got to grow up here." "So are we, sweetheart," Andromeda whispered back. "So are we." Later that night, she and Ted sat at their kitchen table with paperwork spread between them, enrollment forms for the local primary school, medical records that carefully omitted any mention of magical healing, and emergency contact information that listed only Tonks family members. "Harry Potter becomes Harry Tonks," Ted said quietly, signing his name on a form. "At least for the next few years." "Until he's old enough to choose for himself," Andromeda agreed. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows of their small house. But inside, their family slept peacefully, bound together by love and truth and the shared commitment to protecting a little boy who carried the weight of wizarding history in his scar, but wanted nothing more than to be allowed to grow up normally. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: school enrollment, identity protection, the ongoing work of raising a child who was both completely ordinary and utterly extraordinary. But tonight, they had taken another step forward in the most important work of their lives, helping Harry Potter become simply and fully himself. Chapter 5. School Days. September arrived with the particular crisp promise that made Andromeda think of new beginnings and fresh starts. This year, however, the back-to-school excitement carried an edge of anxiety that had nothing to do with Dora's upcoming OWL year at Hogwarts. "I still think this is mental," Dora said for the third time that morning, adjusting Harry's school jumper with the focused intensity she usually reserved for Transfiguration homework. "I should be able to walk him to school every day. What's the point of being home for the summer if I can't look after him properly?" "You'll be back at Hogwarts in 3 days," Andromeda reminded her gently, though she appreciated her daughter's fierce protectiveness. "Harry needs to learn to manage school on his own." "But what if something happens? What if his magic acts up and I'm not there?" Dora's hair had shifted to an anxious auburn that clashed horribly with her pajamas. 7-year-old Harry looked up from his breakfast with the patient expression he got when adults were worrying about things he considered manageable. "Dora, I'll be fine. I've been practicing the breathing exercises, and besides," he lowered his voice conspiratorially, "if anything really bad happens, I can always tell them I need the loo and find somewhere private to calm down." Andromeda bit back a smile at Harry's practical approach to magical crisis management. Over the past year, they had developed an extensive array of coping strategies for his increasingly sophisticated accidental magic episodes, The breathing exercises Dora had taught him were surprisingly effective, and Harry had proven remarkably good at recognizing his warning signs. "See?" Ted said, ruffling Harry's carefully combed hair. "The boy's got it sorted, though perhaps we shouldn't encourage him to spend too much time hiding in toilets." An hour later, Andromeda stood at the edge of Hillcrest Primary School's playground, watching Harry walk through the gates with the determined stride of someone approaching an important mission. He had insisted on carrying his own school bag, despite its size compared to his small frame, and his neat school uniform made him look both younger and older than his 7 years. "Mrs. Tonks." A warm voice interrupted her observation. Andromeda turned to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair approaching with a clipboard. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, Harry's teacher. I wanted to introduce myself before the chaos really begins." "Lovely to meet you," Andromeda said, accepting the offered handshake. "Harry's been looking forward to starting school for months." "Has he? That's wonderful. So many children find the transition difficult." Mrs. Patterson's eyes tracked to where Harry was standing by the climbing frame, quietly observing the other children with the same methodical attention he brought to everything. "He seems quite composed for his age." There was something in her tone that made Andromeda's protective instincts sharpen slightly. Harry's always been a thoughtful child. He tends to watch and listen before jumping into new situations. "Of course. Well, I'm sure he'll settle in beautifully. We'll take good care of him." That afternoon, Harry returned home bursting with information about his new classmates, the school's library policy, and the fascinating discovery that multiplication was just addition, done many times in a row. He chattered through tea with the same enthusiasm he usually reserved for magical theory discussions, and Andromeda felt some of her anxiety ease. And then at lunch, Jenny Morrison couldn't open her milk carton, so I helped her, and she said I was clever with my hands. But I think she just needed someone to show her the proper technique. Harry demonstrated the milk carton opening method with his water glass, clearly pleased with his helpfulness. "Making friends already," Ted observed with approval. "That's my boy." "Well, I wouldn't say friends exactly," Harry said seriously. "It takes time to really know if someone will be a proper friend. But Jenny seems nice, and Oliver Peterson has read loads of books, so we might have things in common." Dora, who was leaving for Hogwarts the following morning, pulled Harry into a fierce hug after dinner. "You remember what we practiced, yeah? If you feel the magic building up, you count to 10, and think about something calm." "I remember," Harry said patiently. "And if I can't control it, I find somewhere private and let it out safely. And if anyone asks weird questions about your family or why you're so clever, I tell them I have an older sister who's very smart and likes to teach me things," Harry finished. "Dora, I'll be fine. I promise." The first few weeks of school passed with surprising smoothness. Harry excelled in every subject with the kind of effortless comprehension that made his teachers exchange meaningful glances when they thought he wasn't looking. His reading level was years ahead of his age group. His mathematical reasoning impressed even the headmaster, and his general knowledge was extensive enough to raise questions about his educational background. "He's quite remarkable," Mrs. Patterson told Andromeda during their first parent-teacher conference in October. "I've been teaching for 25 years, and I've rarely seen such academic maturity in a 7-year-old. "Harry's always been curious about learning," Andromeda said carefully. "We encourage reading at home, and his sister enjoys sharing her school projects with him." "His sister must be quite advanced herself," Mrs. Patterson observed. "Harry mentioned she's studying at a private school. He seems to know rather a lot about subjects we don't typically cover until secondary level." Andromeda felt the familiar prickle of anxiety that came with navigating the boundary between truth and necessary deception. Nymphadora attends a specialized boarding school. She's always been academically gifted, and Harry looks up to her tremendously. "I see." Mrs. Patterson made a note on her clipboard. Has Harry ever been formally tested for his intellectual capabilities? There are programs available for exceptionally gifted children. We prefer to let him develop at his own pace for now, Andromeda said diplomatically. He seems happy with his current situation. It was true. Harry did seem genuinely happy at school, despite the occasional challenges. He had formed tentative friendships with 3 classmates: Jenny Morrison, who possessed a practical kindness that Harry appreciated; Oliver Peterson, who shared his love of books; and, surprisingly, Marcus Webb, a quiet boy who seemed to understand Harry's need for careful observation before engaging. The real challenges came not from academics or social integration, but from the magical incidents that stress sometimes triggered. Harry was generally excellent at self-regulation, but occasionally something would catch him off guard. "What happened today?" Andromeda asked gently, one November afternoon, when Harry came home looking distinctly ruffled. His hair was slightly more disheveled than usual, and there was a particular tension in his shoulders that she had learned to recognize. "Sarah Coleman was being mean to Marcus during lunch," Harry said quietly. "She was saying his mum was stupid because she works in the shop instead of having a proper job. It made me angry, and—" He gestured helplessly at his school bag, which now appeared to be several inches taller than it had been that morning. "Ah," Andromeda said, examining the enlarged bag with professional interest. "How long before anyone noticed?" "I fixed it before anyone saw," Harry said quickly. "I went to the boys' toilets and concentrated really hard on making it normal again. It worked, but it took ages, and I missed the end of lunch." "That was very good thinking," Andromeda assured him, "and it was kind of you to be upset on Marcus's behalf. But Harry, what do we do when we feel the magic building up?" "Count to 10 and think about calm things," Harry recited dutifully. "But Mum, she was being really mean. Marcus looked like he might cry." The simple justice of his response made Andromeda's heart clench. At 7, Harry was already displaying the same fierce protectiveness for the vulnerable that had defined both his birth parents. Managing that impulse while maintaining his magical secrecy was going to be an ongoing challenge. "Next time," she said gently, "try telling a teacher instead of handling it yourself. Mrs. Patterson seems like the sort of person who would put a stop to unkind behavior." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably better. Less chance of accidental bag growing." December brought the kind of magical snowfall that transformed their neighborhood into a Christmas card scene. More importantly for Harry, it brought Dora home from Hogwarts for the holidays, full of stories about OWL preparation, and excited to hear about his first term at primary school. "So you're definitely the cleverest in your year?" she asked on her second evening home, while they decorated the Christmas tree with the eclectic collection of ornaments the family had accumulated over the years. "I think so," Harry said modestly, carefully hanging a paper angel he had made in year 2. "But Jenny's really good at art, and Oliver knows loads about space. Everyone's clever at something." "That's very mature of you," Ted observed, untangling a string of lights with the patience of someone who had been fighting this particular battle for 15 years. "Not everyone your age would recognize that." "Well, you taught me that intelligence comes in different shapes," Harry said matter-of-factly, "like how Dora's brilliant at transfiguration, but still can't remember which spoons are for soup." "Oi!" Dora protested, flicking a piece of tinsel at him. "Cutlery etiquette is different from transfiguring teacups into tortoises." "See? Everyone's clever at something," Harry repeated with a grin. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with enough snow to make the garden look properly festive. Harry woke to find his stocking bulging with small gifts. Books from Ted, magical gadgets from Dora, and from Andromeda, a beautiful hand-knitted scarf in Tonks family colors that made him beam with pleasure. "It's perfect," he declared, wrapping it around his neck despite still being in pajamas. "Thank you, Mum." The family gift exchange continued around the breakfast table, with Harry distributing presents he had made himself. Bookmarks for everyone with their names, carefully lettered in his neat 7-year-old handwriting, and for Dora, a specially constructed quill holder designed to prevent ink spills during homework. "This is brilliant," Dora said, examining the holder with genuine appreciation. "How did you know ink spills were driving me mental?" "You complained about it in your last 3 letters," Harry said practically, "and you had ink stains on your fingers when you came home. I asked Dad to help me with the no-spill charm." "When did you two work on this?" Andromeda asked Ted, who looked suspiciously pleased with himself. "Harry's been planning Christmas presents since October," Ted admitted. "Very organized about it, too. Had a whole list of what everyone might actually want versus what they might expect." As the day progressed through the traditional Tonks family Christmas routine, a proper Christmas dinner with all the trimmings, followed by board games and story reading by the fire, Andromeda marveled at how completely Harry had integrated into their family rhythms. There was no awkwardness, no sense that he was participating in traditions that weren't quite his own. He belonged here as naturally as if he had been born into this house. "Right," Dora announced, after winning their 3rd consecutive game of Exploding Snap. "Time for the Christmas Eve tradition explanation." "Christmas Eve tradition?" Harry looked confused. "But it's Christmas Day." "Exactly," Dora said mysteriously. "Dad, explain about the Tonks family Christmas Eve story tradition." Ted cleared his throat dramatically. "Well, you see, Harry, every Christmas Eve, one member of the family tells a story, either one they've made up, or one they remember from their own childhood, or sometimes one they've read and want to share. We take turns each year." "This year's my turn," Dora said proudly, "and I've prepared something special." What followed was a tale of adventure and friendship that bore a suspicious resemblance to Harry's own story. A young boy, separated from his birth family through tragedy, who found a new home with people who loved him for exactly who he was. The story's hero learned to navigate between 2 worlds, discovered that love was more powerful than fame, and ultimately chose to define himself through his actions rather than his history. "Did you like it?" Dora asked when she finished, though Harry's rapt attention throughout had made the answer obvious. "It was perfect," Harry said quietly. Was it about me?" "It was about all of us," Andromeda said gently, "about how families are made through choice and love, not just blood." "Next year will be your turn to tell a story," Ted added. "Think about what kind of tale you'd like to share." As they settled in for the evening, Harry curled between his parents on the sofa, while Dora read aloud from a book of fairy tales. Andromeda reflected on the year that was ending. Harry had navigated his first term of school with remarkable grace, formed genuine friendships, and managed his magical identity with increasing skill. More importantly, he had continued to grow into the kind, thoughtful, fiercely loyal person that both his birth parents and his adoptive family had hoped he would become. "Mum?" Harry's sleepy voice interrupted her thoughts. "Next year, when I tell my Christmas story, can I tell one about a girl who could change her appearance and a boy who lived in a treehouse and all the adventures they had together?" "I think," Andromeda said, pressing a kiss to his dark hair, "that would be a perfect story." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their small house in winter quiet. But inside, warmth and love filled every corner, and Harry Potter, now and always Harry Tonks, was exactly where he belonged. Chapter 6. Approaching Hogwarts. The owl arrived during breakfast on a Tuesday morning in June, bearing the distinctive purple wax seal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 16-year-old Dora nearly choked on her porridge when she saw it, her hair immediately shifting to an excited golden yellow that clashed spectacularly with her orange pajamas. "It's here," she announced unnecessarily, since the entire family was staring at the official-looking envelope. Minute year letter. 9-year-old Harry set down his toast with the careful deliberation he reserved for important moments. "Open it then," he said, though his own excitement was evident in the way his fingers drummed against the table. Dora broke the seal with shaking hands and pulled out the familiar Hogwarts parchment, along with something else that made her gasp audibly. "What is it?" Andromeda asked, leaning forward with interest. "Head girl," Dora whispered, staring at the badge in disbelief. "They've made me head girl." Ted whooped with delight and immediately pulled his daughter into a crushing hug. "That's our girl. We always knew you were brilliant." Harry beamed with pride that threatened to make his breakfast levitate with enthusiasm. "That's wicked, Dora. You'll get to boss around all the 7th years." "I'll get to help maintain order and support younger students," Dora corrected automatically, though her grin was enormous. "And I'll have my own dormitory, and I can take points from houses and— oh, this means I can put in a good word for you when you start Hogwarts, Harry." The mention of Hogwarts sent a familiar flutter through Harry's stomach. At 9, his eventual attendance at the magical school felt both impossibly distant and alarmingly close. He knew he would go. There was never any question about that. But the reality of leaving his family and entering the wizarding world properly still felt overwhelming. "Speaking of which," Andromeda said, settling back into her chair with a thoughtful expression, "we should probably start discussing your career goals seriously, Dora. Head girl position will look excellent on aura training applications." Dora's hair shifted to a determined red. "Actually, Mum, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I've arranged to meet with Aura Shacklebolt next week. Professor McGonagall said she could arrange an informational interview about training requirements." "Kingsley Shacklebolt?" Ted asked with interest. "He's got an excellent reputation. Very fair-minded, from what I've heard." "That's exactly why I want to meet with him," Dora said earnestly. "I've been reading about aura work, and it's not just about catching dark wizards. They investigate crimes, protect innocent people, and work to make sure the justice system functions properly." She glanced meaningfully at Harry. "Exactly the kind of work that could help people who've been wrongly imprisoned." Harry felt something warm and proud expand in his chest. Even 2 years later, Dora hadn't forgotten her promise to prove Sirius's innocence. The dedication she showed to that goal never failed to amaze him. "Well then," Andromeda said with a smile, "I think we should celebrate both your head girl appointment and your career planning. How about a trip to Diagon Alley this weekend? We can get your school supplies and perhaps look at some aura training preparation materials." The mention of Diagon Alley made Harry's excitement spike noticeably. He hadn't been back to the magical shopping district since he was a baby, and his memories of magical spaces were limited to their home and the handful of wizarding friends who occasionally visited. "Could we visit Flourish and Blotts?" Harry asked eagerly. "And maybe see Ollivanders? I know I won't get my wand for 2 years, but I'd like to see where it will happen." "Of course," Ted said warmly. "It's about time you got properly acquainted with magical commerce anyway." Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for their family expedition. Harry had spent the previous evening carefully selecting his clothes, nice enough to make a good impression, practical enough for walking, and most importantly, completely unremarkable. He had no desire to draw attention to himself in the wizarding world. The Leaky Cauldron was exactly as bustling and chaotic as Harry had imagined. Witches and wizards in robes mingled with the occasional Muggle-born family, creating a wonderful cacophony of conversation and clinking glasses. Harry stayed close to Andromeda as they made their way through the pub, his eyes wide as he took in his first proper glimpse of wizarding society. "Nervous?" Dora asked quietly, noticing his careful observation of everything around them. "A bit," Harry admitted. "It's just different from what I expected." "Different how?" Harry considered the question as they approached the brick wall that led to Diagon Alley. "More normal, I suppose. I thought it would feel more foreign, but everyone just seems like people." "They are just people," Andromeda said gently, tapping the bricks with her wand. "Magic doesn't change that." The wall opened to reveal Diagon Alley in all its chaotic glory. Harry's breath caught as he took in the sight of the winding cobblestone street, lined with shops that seemed to defy both gravity and architectural logic. Witches and wizards hurried past with parcels and owls. Children pressed their noses against shop windows, displaying impossible things, and the air itself seemed to hum with magical energy. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," Ted said with obvious pleasure at Harry's amazed expression. "What would you like to see first?" They started at Flourish and Blots, where Harry immediately disappeared into the magical theory section with the single-minded focus of someone who had found paradise. Andromeda watched him browse through Advanced Transfiguration Theory and the Complete Guide to Defensive Magic, with a mixture of pride and concern. "That's rather advanced reading for a 9-year-old, the shopkeeper observed as Harry carefully examined a book on magical creature behavior. "Harry's always been precocious," Andromeda said diplomatically. "He enjoys learning about magic, even if he can't practice it yet." "Quite right to encourage academic curiosity," the shopkeeper agreed. "Will he be starting Hogwarts soon?" 2 more years, Harry answered for himself, looking up from magical theory and its practical applications. "I want to be properly prepared." They left Flourish and Blots with a considerable collection of books that would keep Harry occupied for months. Dora had found several texts on magical law enforcement that she declared essential for her career preparation, and even Ted had picked up a volume on advanced household charms. Their next stop was the apothecary, where Harry was fascinated by the array of ingredients and their various properties. He asked thoughtful questions about potion-making theory that impressed the shop owner and earned him several free samples of harmless ingredients to examine at home. It was as they were leaving the apothecary that disaster struck in the form of Narcissa Malfoy. Harry didn't recognize her, of course. He had never seen his adoptive aunt before, and wouldn't have known her significance even if he had. But Andromeda's sudden stillness and sharp intake of breath alerted him that something was wrong. The blonde woman approaching them was elegantly dressed in expensive robes, her bearing aristocratic and her expression coolly superior until her eyes fell on Andromeda. Recognition flashed across her features, followed quickly by a complex mixture of emotions that Harry couldn't quite interpret. "Andromeda," Narcissa said quietly, her voice carrying years of complicated history. "Narcissa," Andromeda replied with careful neutrality. "How are you?" "Well, thank you." Narcissa's pale eyes flicked to Ted and Dora with polite disinterest, then landed on Harry with casual curiosity. "Your family?" "My husband, Ted, and my daughter, Nymphadora," Andromeda said smoothly. "And this is Harry." Harry felt the weight of Narcissa's attention and instinctively moved slightly closer to Andromeda. There was something about the woman's scrutiny that made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't identify exactly what. "Harry," Narcissa repeated thoughtfully. "An unusual addition to your family. He doesn't look much like either of you." The comment was casual enough to sound innocent, but Harry caught the sharp edge underneath. This woman was fishing for information, and her interest felt predatory rather than merely curious. "Children often surprise you with how they turn out," Ted said pleasantly, moving to stand protectively near Harry's other side. "Are you shopping for Hogwarts supplies as well?" "Naturally. Draco begins his 4th year this September." Narcissa's eyes never left Harry's face. "How old are you, child?" 9, Harry answered politely, though something about the woman made him want to hide behind Andromeda. 9? How interesting." Narcissa's smile was beautiful and completely cold. "I don't suppose you'll be attending Hogwarts in a few years?" "I expect so," Harry said carefully, unsure why this conversation felt like navigating a minefield. "Wonderful. Perhaps you'll be in the same year as young Gregory Goyle's son. Tell me, what's your surname, dear?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Harry felt rather than saw the tension that suddenly gripped all 3 of his family members, and instinctively understood that his answer mattered more than he could possibly comprehend. "Tonks," he said firmly, lifting his chin with a defiance that surprised even himself. "Harry Tonks." Something flickered in Narcissa's eyes. Disappointment? Relief? Calculation? Harry couldn't tell, but he was suddenly certain that she had been expecting a different answer. "Of course," she said smoothly. "How lovely. Well, I should be going. Draco is waiting at Quality Quidditch Supplies, and you know how impatient teenagers can be." She inclined her head politely to Andromeda. "Sister, the Draco." Single word carried enough weight to bend the entire conversation. Harry watched as Narcissa glided away through the crowd, her expensive robes and aristocratic bearing making other shoppers step aside automatically. "That was your sister?" Harry asked quietly once she was out of earshot. "Yes," Andromeda said simply, though Harry could hear the complexity of emotions beneath that single word. "She seemed—" Harry struggled for a diplomatic way to express his instinctive dislike. "She seemed like someone who asks a lot of questions." "She is," Ted said grimly. "And that's exactly why we need to be careful, Harry. Not everyone in the wizarding world has good intentions." They continued their shopping with somewhat dampened spirits, though Harry's excitement gradually returned as they explored more of the alley's wonders. They visited Ollivander's, where the elderly wand-maker examined Harry with the same intensity that Narcissa had shown, but with a kindness that made the attention feel completely different. "Interesting," Mr. Ollivander murmured, studying Harry's face with pale, silvery eyes. "You have the look of someone who will do great things with magic, young man. When the time comes for your wand, I suspect we'll find something quite special." "What kind of wand do you think I'll get?" Harry asked with genuine curiosity. "Ah, that's the mystery, isn't it? The wand chooses the wizard, you know. But if I were to guess—" Ollivander's expression grew thoughtful. "Something with a phoenix feather core, perhaps. Phoenix feathers are rare, and they choose wizards capable of the greatest range of magic, both light and dark, though the wizard's choices determine which path they follow." The afternoon concluded with ice cream at Fortescue's, where Harry finally had the chance to process everything he had seen and experienced. Diagon Alley had been overwhelming in the best possible way, a glimpse into the world he would soon join, full of wonders and possibilities and apparently complications he was only just beginning to understand. "Dora," he said thoughtfully as they prepared to leave, "when you become an Auror, will you have to investigate people like that woman, your sister?" Dora's hair flickered between colors as she considered the question. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but if I do, I'll make sure I investigate fairly and thoroughly. That's what justice means, treating everyone according to the evidence, not their family connections or social status." "Good," Harry said with satisfaction. "That's exactly the kind of Auror you should be." 2 weeks later, Dora met with Auror Shacklebolt at the Ministry of London. She returned home glowing with excitement and determination, full of information about training requirements and career prospects. "He said I have exactly the right mindset for the work," she reported over dinner. "He also said that Auror training includes extensive work on wrongful conviction cases. Apparently, it's a bigger problem than most people realize." Harry felt a spike of hope at that news. If wrongful convictions were a known issue, then perhaps proving Sirius's innocence wouldn't be as impossible as it sometimes seemed. "Did you tell him about Sirius?" he asked. "Not directly," Dora said carefully, "but I made it clear that I'm particularly interested in justice and making sure innocent people aren't punished for crimes they didn't commit. He seemed to think that was exactly the right motivation for the job." As summer drew to a close and Dora prepared for her final year at Hogwarts, Harry found himself looking forward to the future with a mixture of excitement and determination. He had seen the wizarding world now, understood both its wonders and its complexities. In 2 years, he would join it properly, and when he did, he would be ready, not just with magical knowledge, but with the values his family had instilled in him: justice, loyalty, and the absolute conviction that love was more powerful than fear. The night before Dora left for Hogwarts, she sat on Harry's bed, while he organized the magical theory books he had bought in Diagon Alley. "Are you worried about starting Hogwarts?" she asked quietly. Harry considered the question seriously. "A little," he admitted, "but mostly I'm excited. I want to learn proper magic, and I want to understand the world I'm going to be part of." "You'll be brilliant," Dora said confidently. "And Harry, when you do start Hogwarts, remember what happened today with Narcissa. Not everyone will have good intentions, but that doesn't mean you should be afraid. It just means you should be smart about who you trust." "I'll remember," Harry promised. "And Dora, when you become an Auror, you're going to be amazing at it. Sirius Black is going to get the justice he deserves, because you won't give up until you find the truth." Dora smiled and ruffled his hair affectionately. "We're going to take care of each other, aren't we? Always." "Always," Harry agreed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Chapter 7. The Letter Arrives. The owl arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, just as Harry was finishing his breakfast and preparing for another day of summer reading in the garden. At 11 years old, he had grown tall and lean, with the same unruly black hair and brilliant green eyes that had marked him as special since infancy, though now they carried a wisdom that spoke of a childhood spent in love rather than neglect. The owl was nothing like the family's usual correspondence. This was a magnificent tawny bird, bearing the unmistakable seal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It landed with precise dignity on the kitchen table, extending one leg toward Harry with the gravity of an official ceremony. "Well," Ted said quietly, setting down his morning tea. "I suppose it's time." Harry's hands trembled slightly as he untied the letter, though whether from excitement or anxiety, he couldn't say. The parchment was heavy and cream-colored, and when he turned it over, his heart nearly stopped at what he saw written in emerald green ink. Mr. H. Potter, the 2nd bedroom, Rosewood Cottage. Little Whinging, Surrey. Not Harry Tonks. Harry Potter. "They know," he said quietly, staring at the address that seemed to burn on the page. "They know who I really am." Andromeda moved to stand behind him, her hands settling protectively on his shoulders. "Of course they know, sweetheart. You're on the Hogwarts registry under your birth name. The question is what we do about it." Harry broke the wax seal with careful deliberation and unfolded the letter, reading aloud the words that would change everything. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The standard acceptance letter continued with lists of required books and equipment, but Harry barely registered the details. All he could focus on was that name, Potter, staring up at him from official Hogwarts parchment. "I've been Harry Tonks for 10 years, he said quietly. "Everyone at primary school knows me as Harry Tonks. Mrs. Patterson thinks I'm Harry Tonks. I am Harry Tonks." "You're both," Ted said gently. "You're Harry Potter and Harry Tonks. The question is which name you want to use at Hogwarts." The kitchen fell silent as they contemplated the weight of that decision. Using his birth name would mean stepping fully into his magical heritage, claiming the legacy his parents had died to protect. It would also mean accepting the fame and attention that came with being the boy who lived. "If I go as Harry Potter," Harry said slowly, working through the implications, "everyone will know who I am. They'll expect things from me. They'll want to talk about the night my parents died, and Voldemort, and all the things I can't actually remember." "Yes," Andromeda said honestly, "they probably will. But if I go as Harry Tonks, I'll be lying about who I am. And—" Harry paused, struggling to articulate something that felt important. "It feels like I'd be saying I'm ashamed of my first parents, of what they did." "You could never be ashamed of James and Lily," 18-year-old Dora said firmly from the kitchen doorway. She had graduated from Hogwarts the previous summer, and was now 6 months into her aura training, which gave her a practical perspective on magical world politics that Harry found invaluable. They were heroes, and you know it. I know, Harry said, but I also know that being famous isn't the same thing as being heroic, and I want people to like me for who I am, not for something that happened when I was a baby. The family spent the morning in serious discussion, weighing the benefits and risks of each choice. Using the Tonks name would provide anonymity and allow Harry to form genuine friendships without the complication of fame. But it would also require maintaining a constant deception and might limit his ability to learn about his magical heritage properly. There's another consideration, Dora said during their lunch break from planning. If you go as Harry Potter, I can keep an eye on you more easily. What do you mean? Harry asked. Aura trainees are sometimes assigned to assist with security at Hogwarts, Dora explained, especially when there are students who might need extra protection. If you're officially Harry Potter, I can request assignment to Hogwarts detail. The idea of having Dora nearby during his first year at Hogwarts was enormously appealing. Harry had never spent more than a few weeks apart from his adoptive sister, and the thought of navigating the complexities of magical school without her guidance felt daunting. That afternoon, Andromeda made a decision that surprised everyone. I'm going to contact Professor McGonagall directly, she announced over tea. We need to discuss Harry's specific situation and what protections might be available to him, regardless of which name he uses. Is that wise? Ted asked carefully, drawing attention to our concerns. McGonagall has always been fair-minded, Andromeda said firmly. And if Harry's going to Hogwarts, which he is, then we need to establish clear communication with the school about his needs. 2 hours later, Professor McGonagall's distinctive silver tabby cat appeared in their garden, transforming into the stern deputy headmistress with the fluid grace that made Harry's breath catch in wonder. He had read about animagi transformation, but had never seen it performed. Mrs. Tonks, McGonagall said formally, though her expression was not unkind, I received your message. I understand you wish to discuss young Mr. Potter's enrollment. Harry, Andromeda corrected gently. His name is Harry, and yes, we have concerns about his safety and privacy. McGonagall's sharp eyes studied Harry with the same intensity she might bring to grading a particularly complex transfiguration essay. I see. And what specific concerns do you have? I don't want to be famous, Harry said, before anyone else could answer. I want to learn magic and make friends and be normal. But I also don't want to dishonor my birth parents by hiding from who I am. The simple honesty of his statement seemed to catch McGonagall off guard. She blinked once, and when she spoke again, her voice was considerably gentler. That is a very mature perspective, Mr. Potter. What would you consider an acceptable compromise? Harry had been thinking about this all day, and his answer came without hesitation. I want to go as Harry Potter, because that's who I am. But I want some protections. No interviews with reporters, no special treatment, and if people try to make a big deal about the famous thing, I want the teachers to shut it down. And I want to be assigned to Hogwarts security detail, Dora added, as his aura contact. McGonagall raised an eyebrow at that. You're rather young to be making such requests, Miss Tonks. I'm in aura training, Dora said with dignity, and Harry's my brother. I know he'll need someone watching out for him who understands both his magical background and his family situation. Your brother? McGonagall's tone was carefully neutral, but Harry caught the slight emphasis on the word. In every way that matters, Harry said firmly. The Tonks family took me in when I was 15 months old. They're my real family. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment, studying the family dynamic with sharp intelligence. When she spoke again, it was with the tone of someone making important decisions. Very well. Mr. Potter, you will be enrolled under your birth name, as is proper. However, I will speak with the staff about maintaining reasonable privacy around your background. The prophet will not be granted interviews, and any student harassment related to your fame will be handled as a disciplinary matter. What about Dora? Harry asked anxiously. Can she be assigned to help with school security? Miss Tonks, McGonagall said thoughtfully, your academic record at Hogwarts was exemplary, and I understand you've been accepted into the Aura program. It's not unprecedented for advanced trainees to assist with school security, particularly when they have specific knowledge that might be relevant to student safety. Dora's hair shifted to an excited gold. Does that mean yes? It means I will discuss the possibility with Headmaster Dumbledore and your training supervisors. If it's deemed beneficial, you might be assigned as a special liaison for students requiring additional protection. That evening, after McGonagall had departed with promises to be in touch soon, the family sat in their garden watching the sunset and contemplating the changes that lay ahead. Are you sure about this? Andromeda asked Harry quietly. Once you walk into Hogwarts as Harry Potter, there's no going back. People will know who you are forever. Harry considered the question seriously, as he did everything important. I'm sure. I want to be honest about who I am. Both parts, Potter and Tonks. My birth parents gave me their name and their sacrifice. You and Dad and Dora gave me everything else. I don't want to choose between them anymore. You'll never have to, Ted said warmly. You'll always be our Harry, no matter what name you use at school. Besides, Dora added with a grin, wait until the other students find out that the famous Harry Potter's favorite hobby is reading magical theory textbooks for fun. That'll confuse them properly. Harry laughed, feeling some of his anxiety ease. Do you really think you'll be able to come to Hogwarts? I think McGonagall was more receptive to the idea than she wanted to admit, Dora said thoughtfully. And honestly, having an Aura trainee on staff makes sense from a security perspective. The wizarding world is still recovering from the war, and there are plenty of people who might want to use you to make political statements. The thought was sobering, but somehow less frightening with Dora's practical approach to the danger. She had always been protective, but her Aura training had given her the skills to actually provide meaningful security rather than just emotional support. What if people don't like me? Harry asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in his chest all day. What if they expect me to be some kind of hero, and I'm just me? Then they'll be disappointed, and that's their problem, Andromeda said firmly. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, Harry. Kind, intelligent, loyal, and brave. If that's not enough for some people, then they weren't worth knowing anyway. Besides, Dora added with a mischievous smile, anyone who gives you trouble will have to answer to me, and I'm going to be very good at my job. That night, Harry lay in bed staring at his Hogwarts letter and thinking about identity, belonging, and the courage it took to be honest about who you really were. In 6 weeks, he would walk into the magical world, not as Harry Tonks, the anonymous boy who had lived quietly in Surrey, but as Harry Potter, the child who had survived the unsurvivable. But he would walk in with the love and support of the family who had chosen him, the values they had taught him, and the absolute certainty that he was more than just a famous name or a miraculous survival story. He was Harry Potter and Harry Tonks, and for the first time in his life, he was ready to be both. The next morning brought another owl, this one bearing McGonagall's response to their requests. Dora had been approved for assignment to Hogwarts as a junior security liaison, effective September 1st. Harry would be enrolled as Harry Potter, with special privacy protections in place. Well then, Ted said, folding the letter with satisfaction. I suppose we'd better start planning a proper shopping trip to Diagon Alley. Harry Potter is going to need some school supplies. Harry smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sunshine. In 6 weeks, he would begin the next chapter of his life. But whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with his family beside him and his identity fully integrated at last. He was ready to be exactly who he was meant to be. Chapter 8. Diagon Alley Revelations. The morning of their Hogwarts shopping trip dawned bright and clear, though Harry's excitement was tempered by a peculiar nervousness he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this time he would be entering Diagon Alley not as an anonymous member of the Tonks family, but as Harry Potter, a name that apparently meant something significant to the wizarding world. "Ready?" Andromeda asked as they prepared to leave for the Leaky Cauldron. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing robes that were well made, but not ostentatious, clearly hoping to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. "As ready as I can be," Harry replied, adjusting his own plain robes. Ted had suggested they dress modestly for their shopping trip, reasoning that flashy clothing would only increase the likelihood of unwanted recognition. The Leaky Cauldron was busier than it had been during their previous visit 2 years ago, filled with families conducting their own back-to-school shopping expeditions. Harry noticed several children around his own age clutching Hogwarts letters with the same mixture of excitement and anxiety he felt churning in his own stomach. "First stop, Gringotts," Ted said as they made their way through the pub toward the entrance to Diagon Alley. "We'll need to exchange some Muggle money for wizarding currency, and Harry will need access to his vault." The mention of his vault made Harry's stomach flutter strangely. He had never really considered the practical implications of inheriting his birth parents' estate. The Tonks family lived comfortably, but modestly. Ted's work provided enough for their needs, but they were careful with money and never indulged in unnecessary luxuries. Gringotts Bank loomed before them, its white marble facade and bronze doors impressive enough to make Harry feel slightly intimidated. The goblin guards at the entrance examined their small party with shrewd eyes before allowing them to pass into the vast, echoing interior. "Mr. Potter," the goblin teller said when they approached the counter, his voice carrying a note of recognition that made Harry's heart sink. "We have been expecting you. Your parents' vault, of course. Vault 687. "Actually," Harry said quietly, "I'd like to visit the vault privately, if that's possible, with just my family." The goblin's eyes flicked to the Tonks family with what might have been curiosity. "Of course. Griphook will escort you down. Please follow me." The cart ride to the Potter vault was everything the goblins had promised: terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly unlike anything in the Muggle world. Harry clung to the sides as they plummeted through the underground passages, trying to focus on his excitement rather than his growing anxiety about what they might find. When the cart finally stopped and Griphook opened the vault door, Harry's breath caught in his throat. He had expected some money, enough for school supplies and perhaps a bit extra. What he found was a cavern filled with gold, silver, and bronze coins piled higher than his head, along with various artifacts and jewelry that glittered in the wandlight. "Merlin's beard," Ted breathed, staring at the wealth with obvious shock. Harry felt something cold and uncomfortable settle in his stomach. This wasn't just inheritance money. This was a fortune. While the Tonks family had worried about the cost of his school books and whether they could afford a new winter coat for Dora, he had been sitting on enough wealth to buy a dozen houses. "I had no idea," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the echo of the vault. "Mum, Dad, I'm so sorry. You've been taking care of me all these years, while I had all this money just sitting here." Andromeda moved to his side immediately, her arm settling around his shoulders in the protective gesture she had perfected over the past decade. "Harry, love, we didn't take care of you because we needed your money. We did it because we love you. But you could have used this for Dora's school things, or for the house repairs, or for Dad's workshop improvements." Harry's voice trailed off as he contemplated all the small financial worries his family had navigated while he unknowingly possessed a fortune. "And we managed perfectly well without it," Ted said firmly. "Harry, we chose to raise you because we wanted you in our family, not because of any financial benefit. This money belongs to you." "No," Harry said with sudden determination. This money belongs to our family. I want to share it. I want to help with Dora's aura training expenses, and I want to upgrade the house, and I want us to stop worrying about whether we can afford things." Griphook cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps this discussion would be better continued above ground. Vault time is charged by the minute." They filled Harry's money bag with enough galleons for his school shopping, plus a considerable amount extra, and made their way back to the surface in thoughtful silence. Once they were back in Diagon Alley proper, Harry immediately turned to his family with renewed determination. "I'm serious about sharing the money," he said firmly. "We're going to set up proper accounts for everyone, and we're going to do this shopping trip properly. No more worrying about the cost of things." "Harry," Andromeda said gently, "we appreciate the gesture, but you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Harry interrupted with unusual firmness. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. Now I want to give something back." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to Flourish and Blots. A crowd was gathering around a man with perfectly styled blonde hair and gleaming white teeth, who appeared to be signing books with theatrical flourishes, while a photographer captured every moment. "Who's that?" Harry asked, though he had a sinking feeling about the answer. "Gilderoy Lockhart," Ted said with obvious distaste. "He's written several books about his supposed adventures fighting dark creatures. Very popular with a certain segment of the wizarding population." As if summoned by their attention, Lockhart's brilliant blue eyes suddenly fixed on Harry's face. The smile that spread across the author's features was predatory in its intensity. "Well, well," Lockhart said loudly, his voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. "If it isn't Harry Potter, the famous boy who lived." Every head in the vicinity turned toward them, and Harry felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment as dozens of pairs of eyes focused on him with unmistakable recognition. The crowd began to murmur excitedly, and several people started moving in their direction. "Mr. Lockhart," Andromeda said coolly, stepping slightly in front of Harry in a protective gesture. "I'm sure you understand that Harry is simply here to do his school shopping like any other student." Of course," Lockhart boomed, apparently oblivious to her attempt to deflect attention. "But surely the wizarding public deserves to see their hero. Harry, my boy, come here. Let's get a photograph together." Before Harry could protest, Lockhart had somehow maneuvered him into position beside a towering display of his books, one arm thrown around Harry's shoulders, while the photographer snapped pictures with enthusiastic efficiency. "This is perfect," Lockhart declared. "Harry Potter endorsing my latest work. The publicity will be tremendous." "I'm not endorsing anything," Harry said firmly, trying to extract himself from Lockhart's grip. "I just want to buy my school books." "Modest? How charming." Lockhart's smile never wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen, witness the humility of our young hero. Even in the face of fame, he remains dedicated to his education." The growing crowd was beginning to make Harry genuinely uncomfortable. People were pushing closer, calling out questions about Voldemort and his parents, some even reaching out to try to touch him as if he were some kind of good luck charm. "That's enough," a stern voice cut through the chaos. A witch with bushy brown hair and an take-charge expression had appeared at the edge of the crowd, followed by a tall, thin man with glasses and a woman whose stern demeanor suggested she was not someone to be trifled with. "Hermione, dear, we should let the boy—" the man started to say, but the girl, who appeared to be about Harry's age, was already making her way through the crowd with determined efficiency. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly to Lockhart, "but you're causing a public disturbance. This boy clearly wants to be left alone to do his shopping." Lockhart's smile faltered slightly at this unexpected challenge from an 11-year-old. "My dear child, I'm sure Harry is delighted to meet his adoring public." "I'm not adoring anything," Hermione said crisply, "and neither is anyone else with sense. You're exploiting a child for publicity, which is both unprofessional and unkind." Harry felt a surge of gratitude toward this unknown girl who was fearlessly defending him against a famous adult wizard. "She's right," he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I just want to buy school books. I'm not here to be photographed or to endorse anything." The authoritative tone in his voice seemed to remind people that he was, in fact, a person rather than a celebrity attraction. The crowd began to disperse somewhat, though many continued to stare and whisper. "Well," Lockhart said with a laugh that sounded forced, "of course, youth must have its privacy. Harry, my boy, if you ever want to discuss your experiences with dark magic, do give me a call." He pressed a card into Harry's hand and swept away with his photographer, leaving Harry feeling slightly dazed by the entire encounter. "Thank you," he said gratefully to the bushy-haired girl. "I'm Harry Potter, though I suppose you figured that out." "Hermione Granger," she replied with a warm smile. "And these are my parents, Dr. and Dr. Granger. We're here buying my Hogwarts supplies. I'll be starting first year this September." "So will I," Harry said, feeling a spark of connection. "Are you Muggle-born?" "Yes, though I've read extensively about magical history and culture since receiving my letter." Hermione's eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity. "I must say, I've read about you in several history books, though they all seem to focus on what happened when you were a baby rather than who you actually are as a person." "That's exactly the problem," Harry said with feeling. "I don't remember anything about that night, and I've been raised by the Tonks family since I was 15 months old. I'm much more interested in learning magic than in being famous for surviving something I can't even recall." "That's a very sensible attitude," Dr. Granger said approvingly. "Hermione, perhaps you and Harry could do some of your shopping together. It might be nice for you both to have a friend before starting school." Before Harry could respond, another voice cut through their conversation. "Harry Potter! Blimey, it really is you!" Harry turned to find a red-haired boy about his own age, staring at him with undisguised amazement. Behind the boy stood what was obviously his family, several more red-haired children of varying ages, and a plump woman who was regarding Harry with motherly concern. "I'm Ron Weasley," the boy said eagerly. "Are you really going to Hogwarts this year?" "Yes," Harry said, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden attention from multiple directions. "Are you?" "Yeah, first year. This is mad hunt. I can't believe I'm meeting Harry Potter." "Ron," the woman behind him said gently, "perhaps let the boy breathe. I'm Molly Weasley, dear," she said to Harry. "These are my sons, Ron, who you've met, Fred and George, our twins, and Percy." Harry found himself surrounded by Weasleys, all of whom seemed genuinely friendly rather than fame-seeking. The twins in particular appeared more interested in making jokes than in asking about his scar, which he appreciated enormously. "So," Fred said with a grin, "fancy meeting the famous Harry Potter in a bookshop." "Bit ironic, really," George added. "Most famous people avoid places with that much reading." "I like reading," Harry said defensively, though he was smiling. "Books are useful." "See, Ron," Percy said seriously, "I told you that academic excellence was the path to success. Harry Potter obviously values education." "Percy's head boy this year," Ron explained, with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "He won't shut up about responsibility and academic achievement." Harry found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation with both the Weasleys and Hermione. They treated him like a normal person rather than a celebrity, and their enthusiasm for Hogwarts was infectious. "Would you like to finish your shopping together?" Hermione suggested. "It might be easier to navigate the crowds as a group." "That's a brilliant idea," Harry said gratefully. He glanced back at the Tonks family, who had been watching the entire interaction with amused interest. "Mum? Dad, is that all right with you?" "Of course," Andromeda said warmly. "We'll meet you at Ollivander's in an hour." The next hour passed in a delightful blur of book shopping, cauldron selection, and animated discussion about Hogwarts houses and class schedules. Harry found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't expected. These were people his own age who were genuinely interested in becoming his friends, rather than basking in his reflected fame. "So you've been living with the Tonks family?" Hermione asked as they examined different varieties of quills. "That must have been quite different from growing up in the wizarding world." "It was perfect," Harry said firmly. "They took me in when I was a baby and raised me as their own son. I couldn't have asked for a better family." "But didn't. You want to know about your magical heritage?" Ron asked curiously. "My mum, Andromeda, taught me about magic from the time I was small. She's a brilliant witch, and she made sure I understood magical history and theory. Plus my sister Dora went to Hogwarts, so I heard plenty of stories about school life." "Your sister?" Hermione asked with interest. "Nymphadora Tonks," Harry said proudly. "She graduated last year and she's training to be an Auror now. She's actually been assigned to help with security at Hogwarts this year." "That's wicked," Ron said admiringly, "having an Auror for a sister." When they finally reunited with their respective families at Ollivander's, Harry felt lighter than he had all morning. The encounter with Lockhart had been unpleasant, but meeting Ron and Hermione had more than made up for it. "How did the shopping go?" Ted asked as they walked home later that afternoon. Harry's new wand, Holly and Phoenix Feather, just as Ollivander had predicted, safely tucked in its box. "Much better after I met some other students," Harry said honestly, "though I think the fame thing is going to be more complicated than I hoped." "Probably," Andromeda agreed. "But you handled yourself well today. You were polite but firm about your boundaries, and you made some genuine connections. That's exactly the right approach." That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table examining Harry's new school supplies, he brought up the subject that had been weighing on him all day. "I want to set up a family vault at Gringotts," he said without preamble, "with money from my inheritance, for all of us to use." "Harry," Ted started to protest, but Harry held up his hand. "Please let me finish. I've had 10 years of love, care, education, and family support from you. You've never asked for anything in return, and you've never made me feel like a burden or an obligation. Now I have the means to give something back, and I want to do it." "It's your money, sweetheart," Andromeda said gently. "You don't owe us anything." "I know I don't owe you," Harry said seriously. "That's exactly why I want to share it. Because you gave me everything without expecting anything back. Now I want to do the same for you." The conversation continued long into the evening, but eventually, Harry's determination won out. They would set up a family account that would ensure the Tonks family never had to worry about financial security again. As Harry lay in bed that night, thinking about the day's events, he felt a deep satisfaction. He had faced his first real encounter with wizarding fame, and emerged with new friendships and a clearer sense of his own values. More importantly, he had found a way to honor both his birth parents' legacy and his adoptive family's love. In 3 weeks, he would board the Hogwarts Express as Harry Potter. But he would do so as a young man who understood that fame was far less important than family, friendship, and the courage to be generous with both your wealth and your heart. Chapter 9. Platform 9 and 3/4. September 1st dawned grey and drizzly, matching the bittersweet mood that had settled over the Tonks household. Harry's trunk sat packed and ready by the front door, filled with new robes, carefully organized textbooks, and enough personal belongings to make a dormitory feel like home. But despite months of preparation and excitement, the reality of leaving his family for the first time in his 11 years felt overwhelming. "Are you sure you've packed everything?" Andromeda asked for the 3rd time that morning, checking and rechecking the contents of Harry's trunk with the focused anxiety of a mother preparing to send her child into the unknown. "Mum, I'm sure," Harry said gently, though he appreciated her concern. "We went through the list together twice yesterday." Ted emerged from the kitchen, carrying a thermos of tea and a packet of sandwiches. "For the train journey," he explained, tucking them carefully into Harry's carry bag. "I know they'll feed you at the feast, but the trip is several hours long." Harry felt his throat tighten with emotion. These small acts of care, the packed lunch, the worried checking, the way both his parents were trying so hard to appear calm, reminded him of everything he would miss during his months at Hogwarts. "Where's Dora?" he asked, looking around for his sister. She had promised to see him off before departing for her own assignment at the school. "Here," came Dora's voice from the stairs. She descended wearing the deep blue robes of her aura training, her hair a determined silver that matched the early morning light. In her hands, she carried a small wrapped package. "You're going away present," she said, settling beside him on the sofa. "Open it." Harry unwrapped the package carefully to reveal what appeared to be a small hand mirror in a simple wooden frame. The glass was perfectly clear, and when he looked into it, he saw his own reflection staring back. But somehow the mirror felt different from ordinary glass, charged with a subtle magical energy. "It's a two-way mirror," Dora explained, pulling an identical mirror from her own robes. "James and Sirius invented them when they were at school. Dad and I found the instructions in some old papers and made a new set." Harry's breath caught. "My father made these?" "The original design, yes. These are new, but they work the same way. Just say my name to the mirror, and I'll be able to see and hear you, no matter where I am, and I'll be able to reach you the same way." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Harry. Not only was it a practical means of communication, but it was also a tangible connection to his birth father's creativity and ingenuity. "Thank you," he said quietly, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "This is perfect. I'll be at Hogwarts myself, of course, but I'll be working mostly with the staff and older students. If you need me, really need me, use the mirror. For anything else, write letters like a normal student. We don't want people getting suspicious about why you have direct access to an aura trainee." An hour later, they stood on the bustling concourse of King's Cross Station, surrounded by the controlled chaos of families sending children off to boarding schools. Harry pushed his trolley through the crowds, trying to look like any other 11-year-old, heading off to education rather than the famous boy who lived embarking on his magical journey. "Platform 9 3/4, Ted said, as they approached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. "Right then, Harry. Remember what we practiced?" Harry nodded, took a deep breath, and walked straight at the solid brick wall at a measured pace. The sensation of passing through the magical barrier was exactly as Dora had described, a brief moment of cool darkness before emerging into the warm, steam-filled chaos of the hidden platform. The Hogwarts Express stood before them in all its scarlet glory, steam billowing from its chimney, while families said their goodbyes and students loaded trunks into the luggage compartments. The sight of the magnificent train made Harry's excitement spike despite his nervousness about leaving home. "There you are," came a familiar voice. Ron Weasley appeared through the crowd, his own trolley loaded with a battered trunk and a cage containing a fat rat. Behind him came the rest of the Weasley family, all talking at once in the cheerful chaos that seemed to follow them everywhere. "Hello, Ron," Harry said warmly, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. "Ready for the adventure?" "More than ready," Ron replied with a grin. "Mum's been fussing all morning about whether I've packed enough socks." "Socks are important," Andromeda said seriously, earning a grateful look from Mrs. Weasley. "You can never have too many clean socks at boarding school." As they loaded their trunks onto the train, Harry spotted another familiar figure making her way through the crowd. Hermione Granger approached with her parents in tow, her bushy hair neat and her expression a mixture of excitement and determination. "Harry," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "I was hoping I'd see you before we boarded." "Wouldn't miss it," Harry replied. "Are you ready for this?" "I've read Hogwarts, a history 3 times, and memorized the first-year curriculum," Hermione said matter-of-factly. "I think I'm as ready as I can be." The whistle blew, indicating 5 minutes until departure. Harry felt his stomach flutter with a sudden spike of separation anxiety as the reality of leaving hit him fully. "Right then," Ted said, pulling Harry into a fierce hug. "Write to us every week. Study hard, but not too hard. Make friends. Have adventures. And remember, I know who I am," Harry finished, reciting the family motto they had developed over the years. "I know who loves me, and I know what matters." "Exactly," Andromeda said, her own hug lasting perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "We're so proud of you already, sweetheart." Dora's goodbye was characteristically practical. "I'll probably see you before you see me," she said with a wink. "But remember, the mirror is for emergencies only. Don't make me explain to McGonagall why a first year has magical communication equipment." "I'll be careful," Harry promised. As the final whistle blew and students began boarding in earnest, Harry took one last look at his family standing on the platform. Ted had his arm around Andromeda's shoulders, and Dora was waving with uncharacteristic emotion, glittering in her eyes. These were the people who had shaped him, loved him, and prepared him for this moment. "Come on," Ron said gently, apparently sensing Harry's emotional state. "Let's find a compartment." They made their way through the train corridor, peering into compartments until they found one that was nearly empty, except for a girl with long blonde hair who appeared to be reading a magazine upside down. "Is it all right if we sit here?" Harry asked politely. The girl looked up with enormous pale eyes and a dreamy expression. "Of course. I'm Luna Lovegood. You're Harry Potter." It wasn't a question, and Harry felt his stomach sink slightly at the immediate recognition. But Luna's tone was matter-of-fact rather than starstruck, so he settled into the seat across from her with only mild apprehension. "How did you know?" he asked curiously. "Your scar," Luna said simply. "Also, you have a very interesting aura. Most famous people have quite boring auras, actually, but yours has unusual depth." Ron looked slightly bewildered by this explanation, but Harry found Luna's straightforward oddness somehow refreshing after his experiences with celebrity seekers. "Are you starting first year as well?" Hermione asked as she joined them, having apparently completed her own family farewell. "Oh no," Luna said airily. "I'm starting second year. But all the older students' compartments were full, and first years are often more interesting to talk to anyway." The train lurched into motion, and Harry watched through the window as the platform slowly disappeared from view. His family's faces grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely, leaving him with a hollow feeling in his chest and the sudden understanding that this was truly happening. He was going to Hogwarts. "Nervous?" Ron asked, apparently noting Harry's expression. "A bit," Harry admitted. "It's the first time I've been away from my family for more than a few days." "The Tonks family, right?" Hermione said. "You mentioned them when we met in Diagon Alley. That must make the transition more difficult, leaving people you're so close to." "Much more difficult than if you'd grown up in the wizarding world," Luna agreed with her characteristic directness. "Most wizard children are used to the idea of going away to school, but you've had a proper muggle upbringing with daily family contact." Her observation was so accurate that Harry felt a spike of surprise. "Exactly. I'm not used to being away from them for months at a time." "You'll adjust," Ron said confidently. "And Hogwarts is brilliant. My brothers are always writing home about the adventures they have." "What house do you think you'll be sorted into?" Hermione asked, clearly eager to discuss the academic aspects of their new school. Harry considered the question seriously. He had read extensively about the four houses and their various characteristics, but he honestly wasn't sure where he belonged. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "The sorting hat decides, doesn't it? Based on your character and values." "That's right," Luna said, "though sometimes it takes your preferences into account as well. My father was in Ravenclaw, so I'm hoping for the same, but the hat will know best." The conversation continued throughout their journey, covering everything from Quidditch to class schedules to speculation about their professors. Harry found himself genuinely enjoying the company of his new friends, though he noticed that both Ron and Hermione occasionally glanced at his scar with poorly concealed curiosity. "Go ahead and ask," he said finally, when Ron's glances became particularly obvious. "Ask what?" Ron said, trying for innocence. "About the scar. About you-know-who. About that night. Everyone's going to wonder, so you might as well get it out of the way." Ron and Hermione exchanged glances. Then Hermione leaned forward with her characteristic directness. "Do you remember anything about it? About what happened?" "Nothing," Harry said honestly. "I was 15 months old. My first clear memories are from when I was about 3, living with the Tonks family. Everything before that is just gone." "But you know the story?" Ron asked. "I know what people have told me. My birth parents died protecting me. Voldemort tried to kill me and somehow failed. The curse rebounded and destroyed his body instead." Harry touched his scar unconsciously. "This is all I have left of that night." "That must be strange," Luna said thoughtfully, "being famous for something you can't remember." "Very strange," Harry agreed, "and not particularly pleasant. I'd rather be known for something I actually chose to do." As afternoon faded to evening, the train began to slow, and a voice echoed through the corridors, announcing their arrival at Hogsmeade Station. Harry felt his nervous excitement spike as he changed into his school robes and gathered his belongings. The next few hours passed in a blur of boats across the lake, gasps at the first sight of Hogwarts Castle, and the overwhelming grandeur of the Great Hall, filled with floating candles and a ceiling that showed the star-filled sky above. Professor McGonagall's voice carried clearly through the hall as she began calling names for the sorting ceremony. Harry watched as Luna was sorted into Ravenclaw with obvious satisfaction, and both Ron and Hermione were sorted into Gryffindor after brief deliberations by the Hat. "Potter, Harry!" The silence that fell over the Great Hall was absolute. Every head turned toward him as he made his way to the 3-legged stool, and Harry could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes tracking his movement. He settled onto the stool with as much dignity as he could muster, and felt the sorting hat drop over his head. "Well, well," came a voice in his mind. "Mr. Harry Potter, this is unusual." "What's unusual?" Harry thought back. "You are not at all what I expected. 10 years ago, when I sorted your parents, I could see echoes of the person you would become, brave like your father, clever like your mother, with the potential for greatness. But this—" The Hat paused. "You have been shaped by love, haven't you? Real, consistent, unconditional love." "Yes," Harry replied simply. "The Tonks family raised me." "It shows. Your character is remarkably well-balanced. You have courage, yes, but tempered with wisdom. You have ambition, but it's focused on justice rather than personal gain. You value knowledge, but you treasure relationships more. And your loyalty—" The Hat chuckled. "Your loyalty runs deeper than the foundations of this castle." "So where do I belong?" "Ah, that is the question, isn't it? You could do well in any house, Mr. Potter. But I think there is one place where you will find both the challenges and the support you need, where your particular combination of traits will be valued and nurtured." Harry held his breath, waiting. "Gryffindor!" The Hat's decision echoed through the Great Hall, followed immediately by thunderous applause from the Gryffindor table. Harry made his way to his new house table with a mixture of relief and anticipation, settling between Ron and Hermione with a sense of rightness that surprised him. "Knew you'd be in Gryffindor," Ron said with satisfaction. "You've got the look of someone who'd do the right thing, even if it was dangerous." "Is that what Gryffindor values?" Harry asked. "Bravery and moral courage," Hermione said knowledgeably, "though I think each house values more than its primary trait. We're supposed to support each other and work together." As the feast began and conversation flowed around him, Harry felt some of his homesickness ease. These were good people, and this was going to be a good place to learn and grow. He missed his family terribly already, but he could see the potential for new relationships and experiences that would shape him in positive ways. Late that night, as he lay in his new dormitory bed, listening to his roommate's breathing settle into sleep, Harry quietly took out Dora's mirror. "Dora," he whispered to his reflection. His sister's face appeared in the glass almost immediately, her hair a warm gold in what appeared to be wand light. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "Good," Harry whispered back. "Strange, but good. I'm in Gryffindor with Ron and Hermione. The castle is incredible, and I already feel like I belong here, even though I miss you all terribly." "That's exactly how it should be," Dora said with satisfaction. "You're going to do brilliantly, Harry. Just remember, I know who I am," Harry finished with a smile. "I know who loves me, and I know what matters." "Exactly. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow your real Hogwarts adventure begins." As Harry tucked the mirror safely away and settled into his new bed, he felt a deep contentment settle around him. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, starting his magical education at the most famous wizarding school in Britain. But more importantly, he was Harry Tonks, beloved son and brother, carrying the values of family, loyalty, and love into whatever adventures lay ahead. And that, he thought as he drifted off to sleep, was exactly who he was meant to be. Chapter 10. First Term Challenges. By October, Harry Potter had established himself as one of the most capable students in his year, though not in the way anyone had expected. Where his classmates had anticipated dramatic displays of raw magical power or instinctive brilliance, they found instead a methodical, well-prepared student who approached every subject with the thoroughness of someone who had been properly educated from childhood. "Potter," Professor McGonagall said after their third Transfiguration lesson, "your theoretical foundation is quite remarkable for a first year. Have you been studying advanced magical theory?" "My mother taught me from when I was small," Harry replied, carefully not mentioning which mother he meant. "She believed in understanding the principles behind magic, not just the practical applications." McGonagall's expression softened slightly. "A wise approach. 5 points to Gryffindor for preparation and academic excellence." The praise felt good, but Harry found himself missing the family discussions that had shaped his magical education. Andromeda's patient explanations, Ted's practical insights, and Dora's enthusiastic demonstrations had made learning magic feel like a natural extension of family life rather than formal schooling. His success in other classes followed a similar pattern. In charms, Professor Flitwick was delighted with Harry's precise wand movements and clear understanding of magical theory. In defense against the dark arts, Professor Quirrell seemed both pleased and nervous about Harry's advanced knowledge of defensive spells. Even in history of magic, Harry's extensive reading allowed him to participate meaningfully in discussions that left most of his classmates struggling to stay awake. The only exception was potions. Professor Severus Snape had clearly come into the school year with specific expectations about Harry Potter. From the first lesson, his black eyes had tracked Harry's every movement with the intensity of someone looking for confirmation of preconceived notions. But as the weeks progressed, Snape's expression had shifted from anticipatory dislike to something more complex, a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and what might have been grudging respect. "Potter," Snape said during their fourth lesson, his voice carrying its usual silky menace, "describe the 3 main ingredients in a sleeping draught, and explain why powdered moonstone must be added counterclockwise." Harry straightened in his seat, meeting Snape's gaze directly but respectfully. "The 3 main ingredients are lavender, valerian root, and powdered moonstone, Professor. The moonstone must be stirred counterclockwise to activate its soporific properties. Clockwise stirring would create a mild stimulant effect instead." Snape's eyes narrowed slightly. "And where, pray tell, did you learn such advanced brewing theory, Potter?" From Magical Drafts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger, Professor. My mother recommended it as foundational reading for understanding magical interactions. Harry kept his voice steady and respectful, though he could see Snape's jaw tighten at the mention of his mother. Indeed, Snape said softly. And what else did your mother teach you about potion making? The pause before mother was loaded with meaning that Harry didn't entirely understand, but he sensed dangerous ground and proceeded carefully. She taught me that potions are essentially magical chemistry, Professor. That understanding the properties of ingredients and their interactions is more important than just following recipes. She said the best potion makers think like scientists as well as wizards. Something flickered in Snape's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. A surprisingly mature perspective, he said finally. We shall see if your practical skills match your theoretical knowledge. Begin brewing. As October progressed toward Halloween, Harry found himself settling into the rhythms of Hogwarts life while maintaining his connection to home through regular letters and occasional mirror conversations with Dora. Her insights from her aura training proved unexpectedly relevant to school life. Remember, she had said during one late-night mirror conversation, your professors are watching how you handle pressure and conflict. Show them you can think clearly under stress, and they'll respect you. Lose your temper, and they'll write you off as just another hot-headed Gryffindor. This advice proved invaluable when Malcolm Baddock from Slytherin began making increasingly pointed comments about Harry's famous status and questioning his right to be at Hogwarts. I heard your parents were blood traitors, Baddock said loudly during lunch one day, clearly hoping to provoke a reaction. No wonder you're living with mudbloods instead of proper wizarding family. Harry felt the familiar warm bubbles of magic building in his chest, his childhood warning sign for accidental magic. But instead of letting them overflow, he took a deep breath and counted to 10, just as Dora had taught him years ago. My birth parents died fighting for what they believed in, Harry said calmly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The Tonks family raised me with love and respect for all magical people, regardless of blood status. I consider myself fortunate to have learned values like loyalty and justice rather than prejudice and hatred. The Great Hall had grown quiet around them, students listening to the exchange with obvious interest. Baddock's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Professor McGonagall appeared behind him. Mr. Baddock, she said coolly, I believe you have a potions essay that was due this morning. Professor Snape is waiting in his office. As Baddock hurried away, McGonagall caught Harry's eye with an approving nod before continuing on her way. Harry felt a surge of satisfaction, not because he had won a confrontation, but because he had handled it in a way that would have made his family proud. Halloween arrived with the traditional decorations and feast, but for the first time in his life, Harry found himself missing family traditions rather than participating in them. The Tonks family had always made Halloween special, carved pumpkins in the garden, homemade costumes, and Andromeda's traditional pumpkin soup served by candlelight. The grand feast in the Great Hall was impressive, but it felt impersonal compared to the intimate celebrations he had grown up with. You look sad, Hermione observed as they sat at the Gryffindor table, surrounded by floating jack-o'-lanterns and the chatter of excited students. Just missing home, Harry admitted. This is the first Halloween I've spent away from my family. What do they usually do? Ron asked with interest. Harry smiled, thinking of the warm traditions that had marked every October 31st of his childhood. My mum, Andromeda, makes pumpkin soup, and we eat it by candlelight while telling ghost stories. Dad always carves elaborate jack-o'-lanterns, and Dora used to change her appearance to match whatever costume I wanted to wear. That sounds lovely, Hermione said wistfully. Much more personal than this. Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Quirrell bursting into the Great Hall, his face pale with terror. Troll, he gasped, pointing dramatically toward the dungeons. Troll in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know. He then promptly fainted, causing screams and chaos to erupt throughout the hall. As Dumbledore called for calm, and the prefects began organizing students back to their dormitories, Harry felt his protective instincts spike. But this time, instead of reacting impulsively, he found himself thinking strategically, a response shaped by years of Dora's patient training in crisis management. "Where's Hermione?" Ron asked suddenly, looking around the crowd of Gryffindor students. Harry scanned the hall and realized with growing concern that Hermione was nowhere to be seen. "She might still be in the bathroom," he said, remembering that she had left the feast early after Baddock's earlier comments had upset her. "The girls' bathroom on the first floor." "Near the dungeons," Ron said with dawning horror. "Where the troll is." Without hesitation, Harry started moving against the flow of students. But instead of rushing off alone, he caught Percy Weasley's arm. "Percy," he said urgently, "Hermione Granger is missing. She might be in the girls' bathroom, near where the troll was spotted. We need to tell a teacher." Percy's face went pale. "Are you sure?" "She left the feast upset and hasn't come back," Harry said quickly. "Ron and I were going to check on her, but if there's really a troll—" "You're not going anywhere near a troll," Percy said firmly. "I'll get Professor McGonagall. You two get back to Gryffindor Tower." But as Percy hurried toward the teacher's table, Ron grabbed Harry's arm. "We can't just leave her. What if the teachers don't get there in time?" Harry felt torn between his protective instincts and his training in thinking clearly under pressure. The responsible thing would be to trust the teachers to handle the situation. But the thought of Hermione facing a mountain troll alone made his chest tight with anxiety. "We go carefully," he decided. "We find her and get her out of there if possible. If we can't handle it, we retreat immediately and get help." They slipped away from the crowd and made their way through the castle corridors with careful stealth. Harry found himself drawing on every lesson Dora had taught him about moving quietly and staying alert to danger. The sound of destruction led them to the girls' bathroom, where they could hear Hermione's terrified sobs mixed with the troll's confused grunting. Through the partially open door, they could see the massive creature swinging its club wildly, while Hermione cowered behind the sinks. "Distraction," Harry whispered to Ron. "Make noise. Draw it away from her. I'll get Hermione to safety." "What about you?" Ron whispered back. "I'll be right behind you. Trust me." Ron nodded and began throwing chunks of broken sink at the troll, shouting insults to draw its attention. As soon as the creature turned toward the new threat, Harry darted into the bathroom. "Hermione," he called quietly. "Come on, we need to go." But as they tried to escape, the troll blocked their path, its club raised threateningly. Harry felt his magic building in response to the immediate danger, but instead of letting it explode outward chaotically, he focused it with the control he had been practicing since childhood. "Wingardium Leviosa," he said clearly, pointing his wand at the troll's club. The spell was stronger than anything he had managed in class, lifting the heavy weapon completely out of the creature's grasp and sending it crashing down on the troll's head. The troll swayed for a moment, then collapsed with a tremendous thud, unconscious but breathing. "Brilliant," Ron said, staring at Harry with amazement. "How did you manage such a powerful levitation charm?" "Practice," Harry said simply, helping Hermione to her feet. "And good motivation." When the teachers arrived moments later, they found 3 first-year students standing calmly beside an unconscious troll, having successfully resolved the crisis through teamwork and controlled use of magic rather than panic and recklessness. "Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said after they had given their account of events, "your actions tonight showed both courage and remarkable presence of mind. 5 points to Gryffindor for protecting a fellow student." Later that night, as they sat in the Gryffindor common room processing the events of the evening, Hermione looked at Harry with new respect. "You've been trained for crisis situations, haven't you?" she said. "The way you handled yourself tonight, that wasn't just natural talent. Someone taught you to think clearly under pressure." Harry nodded. My sister Dora is training to be an aura. She's been teaching me about crisis management since I was small. She always said that the key to handling emergencies is to stay calm and think strategically, rather than just reacting emotionally. That's brilliant, Ron said admiringly. No wonder you were so collected tonight. And as the summiturned, common room gradually emptied, and students made their way to bed. Harry quietly took out his mirror for a brief check-in with Dora. "How was your first Halloween at Hogwarts?" she asked when her face appeared in the glass. "Educational," Harry said wryly. "There was a troll incident, but we handled it." Dora's expression sharpened immediately. "Define handled it." Harry gave her a quick summary of the evening's events, watching her face shift from concern to pride as he described their strategic approach to the crisis. "You did exactly right," she said when he finished. "You protected someone who needed help. You used your training to stay calm, and you worked as a team rather than trying to be a hero on your own. I'm proud of you." "I missed our family Halloween traditions," Harry said quietly. "The feast was nice, but it wasn't the same." "I know," Dora said gently, "but you're building new traditions now, with new people who care about you. That's not replacing our family traditions. It's adding to them." As Harry settled into bed that night, he reflected on the distance he had traveled in just 2 months. He was learning to navigate the complexities of Hogwarts social dynamics, excelling academically thanks to his solid educational foundation, and building genuine friendships based on shared values rather than celebrity status. Most importantly, he was proving to himself that he could be Harry Potter, famous, powerful, and potentially dangerous, while remaining Harry Tonks at heart. Thoughtful, loyal, and committed to protecting the people he cared about. The balance wasn't always easy to maintain, but with his family's love supporting him from afar, and new friends beside him at school, Harry felt confident that he could continue growing into exactly the person he was meant to be. Chapter 11. Christmas Homecoming. The Hogwarts Express pulled into King's Cross Station on a crisp December morning, its scarlet engine gleaming in the weak winter sunlight. Harry pressed his face to the compartment window, scanning the platform for familiar faces among the crowd of parents waiting to collect their children for the Christmas holidays. There, near the barrier, standing close together with matching expressions of barely contained excitement, were Andromeda and Ted. At 18, Dora towered beside them, her hair a festive golden red that caught the morning light like Christmas tinsel. "There they are," Harry said, pointing them out to Ron and Hermione, who were gathering their belongings with nervous energy. Both his friends had accepted the Tonks family's invitation to spend Christmas at their home, though for different reasons. Ron's family was spending the holidays visiting Charlie in Romania, and rather than leave him alone at Hogwarts, Harry had convinced his parents to extend their traditional open-door policy to include his new friends. Hermione's parents were attending a dental conference in Switzerland, and while she had initially planned to stay at school as well, the prospect of experiencing a magical Christmas celebration had proven irresistible. "Are you sure they won't mind having extra guests?" Hermione asked for the 3rd time as they made their way through the crowded corridors toward the exit. "They'll be delighted," Harry assured her. "Mum always says the best Christmas celebrations are the ones where you're not quite sure where everyone's going to sleep." The reunion on the platform was everything Harry had hoped for, and more. Andromeda's hug lasted long enough to make up for 3 months of separation, and Ted's familiar embrace carried the scent of wood shavings and the pipe tobacco he only smoked during winter evenings. "Look at you," Dora said, holding Harry at arm's length to examine him properly. "You've grown at least 2 inches, and you look—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Confident. Settled. Hogwarts suits you." "It does," Harry agreed, and realized as he said it that it was completely true. "But I missed home terribly." "As you should," Andromeda said warmly, before turning her attention to Ron and Hermione. and you must be the friends we've heard so much about. I'm Andromeda Tonks, and this is my husband Ted." "Ron Weasley," Ron said, shaking hands with obvious nervousness. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Tonks. My mum sent a fruitcake and says to tell you she's grateful for your kindness." "Hermione Granger," Hermione added, her own handshake, firm despite her apparent anxiety. "I brought some books about magical traditions that I thought you might find interesting, and my parents asked me to give you these." She pulled out a box of expensive chocolates from a London confectioner. "How thoughtful," Ted said genuinely. "I'm looking forward to getting to know you both properly. Harry's letters have been full of stories about your adventures." The journey home was filled with animated conversation as Harry shared term highlights while his friends marveled at the easy warmth of the Tonks family dynamic. By the time they reached the cottage, both Ron and Hermione were visibly more relaxed, drawn in by the family's natural inclusiveness. "Right then," Andromeda said, as they unloaded trunks and settled in the sitting room. "First things first, sleeping arrangements. Harry, you're back in your own room, of course. Ron, we've set up a camp bed in Harry's room, and Hermione, you'll be sharing with Dora. I hope that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Hermione said gratefully. "Thank you for including us in your family Christmas." "You're Harry's friends," Ted said simply. "That makes you family too." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of Christmas preparations that showcased the Tonks family traditions at their best. Andromeda taught Hermione the family recipe for Christmas pudding, while Ted showed Ron his workshop and demonstrated the art of wandless household charms. Dora regaled all three children with stories from her aura training, carefully edited to remove the more disturbing elements. Harry found himself reveling in the chance to show his school friends the home that had shaped him. He took them through the garden where he had first learned to control his magic, up to the treehouse where he still practiced difficult spells, and into the kitchen where family conversations had taught him everything he knew about magical history and ethics. "Your family is incredible," Hermione said on their third evening, as they sat by the fire while Andromeda read aloud from a collection of magical fairy tales. "The way they talk to each other, the way they include everyone, it's exactly what a family should be." "My parents are great too," Ron said quickly, then paused, "but they're always so busy with everyone, and there's never enough—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Never enough what?" Harry asked gently. "Money, time, attention, space." Ron's voice was quiet. "I love my family, but sometimes I feel lost in the crowd. Here, everyone actually listens when you talk." Ted looked up from his evening paper with the kind attention Harry remembered from 1,000 similar conversations. "That's because we've learned that everyone has something worth saying, even if they don't always know how to say it. It's one of the most important lessons you can learn about people." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, with a dusting of snow that made the cottage look like a fairy tale illustration. The living room had been transformed overnight, with carefully wrapped packages arranged under a tree that sparkled with both magical and muggle decorations. Harry had spent considerable time and thought on his gifts, using his newfound access to his inheritance to express years of gratitude to his family and new affection for his friends. For Ted, he had commissioned a set of precision woodworking tools with built-in protective charms. For Andromeda, a rare first edition of advanced magical theory that she had mentioned wanting months ago. Dora's gift was the most personal, a set of aura-grade protective amulets and a leather portfolio embossed with her initials for carrying case files. "For when you become the best aura in the ministry," Harry said as she opened the package. "Harry," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this must have cost a fortune." "I wanted to," Harry said simply. "You've all given me everything. I wanted to give something back." For Ron, Harry had chosen a deluxe wizard's chess set with pieces carved from rare magical woods, each piece enchanted to provide strategic advice during play. Ron's face lit up with genuine delight as he examined the craftsmanship. "This is the most beautiful chess set I've ever seen," he breathed. "Harry, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Yes, you can," Harry said firmly. "You're my best friend, Ron. You deserve beautiful things." Hermione's gift was a collection of rare books on magical theory and history, including several volumes that weren't available in the Hogwarts library. But Harry had also included something more personal, a leather-bound journal with her initials engraved on the cover. "For your observations and theories," he explained, as she ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "I noticed you're always taking notes on magical interactions and social dynamics. I thought you should have a proper place to record them." "You noticed that?" Hermione asked, looking genuinely surprised. "I notice lots of things about my friends," Harry said with a smile. "It's important to pay attention to what matters to people." The gift exchange was interrupted by the arrival of several owls carrying packages from the Weasley family, Hermione's parents, and various other well-wishers. But the most significant delivery came via Floo powder. A brief visit from Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had come to check on Dora's progress and ended up staying for Christmas dinner. "So you're the famous Harry Potter," Kingsley said, as they sat around the extended dining table, which had been charmed to accommodate the larger group. "Dora's told me quite a lot about you." "I hope good things," Harry said politely. "Very good things. She's particularly impressed with your crisis management skills. Apparently you handled a troll incident with remarkable composure for an 11-year-old. Harry felt his cheeks warm. "I had good training. Dora taught me to think strategically rather than just react emotionally." "An essential skill for both auras and everyday life," Kingsley agreed. "She's going to make an excellent aura, by the way. Her training scores are exceptional, and her commitment to justice is exactly what the Ministry needs." The conversation continued throughout the meal, touching on everything from aura work to Hogwarts classes to magical theory. Harry noticed how naturally his school friends integrated into the family dynamic, with Ron asking thoughtful questions about Ted's work and Hermione engaging Andromeda in complex discussions about magical lore. "This is what Christmas should feel like," Hermione said quietly to Harry as they helped clear the dinner dishes. "Warm and safe and full of people who care about each other." "Don't your parents make Christmas special?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. "They try, but—" Hermione hesitated. "They don't understand my world. They love me, but they can't really share my excitement about magic or understand why Hogwarts matters so much to me. It's lonely sometimes being the only magical person in your family." Harry felt a pang of sympathy for his friend. He had grown up surrounded by magic and magical people who understood his abilities and encouraged his development. The idea of feeling isolated in his own family was heartbreaking. "You'll always have us," he said simply. "And my family. Mum and Dad meant it when they said your family now." As the evening wound down and they gathered around the fire for the traditional Tonks family storytelling session, the conversation turned to the remainder of the school year. "Are you looking forward to going back to Hogwarts?" Andromeda asked, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. "Yes," Harry said honestly. "I love learning there, and I've made good friends. But I'll miss this." He gestured around the warm sitting room, taking in the faces of the people he loved most. "We need to talk about safety measures for the rest of the term," Dora said, shifting into her professional aura mode. "I've been keeping an eye on things at Hogwarts, and there are some concerns about security this year." "What kind of concerns?" Ted asked, his expression sharpening. "There have been some unusual incidents around the school. Strange magical disturbances, evidence of intruders, heightened protective measures around certain areas of the castle. Nothing that directly threatens students, but enough to make the staff nervous." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "Do you think it has something to do with me? With being Harry Potter?" "Possibly," Dora said honestly. "Or it might be completely unrelated. But I want to make sure we have proper communication protocols in place. I've arranged to have more regular patrols near the Gryffindor common room. and I want you to promise me you'll use the mirror if anything feels wrong." "I promise," Harry said solemnly. "What about us?" Ron asked. "Should we be watching out for anything specific?" "Just keep being good friends," Andromeda said warmly. "Look out for each other, trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to seek help from teachers if something feels dangerous." New Year's Eve arrived with a proper snowstorm that blanketed the countryside in pristine white. The Tonks family had always celebrated the transition to the new year, with a combination of reflection and anticipation, and this year's celebration felt particularly meaningful. As they sat around the fire at midnight, each sharing hopes and goals for the year ahead, Harry felt a deep contentment settle around him like a warm blanket. He had successfully navigated his first term at Hogwarts, while maintaining his identity as both Harry Potter and Harry Tonks. He had made genuine friendships based on shared values rather than fame. And he was surrounded by family, both blood and chosen, who loved and supported him unconditionally. "My goal for this year," he said when his turn came, "is to keep becoming the person you've all raised me to be. To use my abilities to protect people I care about, to learn everything I can about magic and the magical world, and to never forget that love is more powerful than fame or fear." "Perfect," Andromeda said, tears glittering in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." As they prepared for bed that night, Ron and Hermione both thanked their hosts with obvious sincerity. "This has been the best Christmas of my life," Ron said to Ted and Andromeda. "Thank you for making me feel so welcome. Thank you for showing me what a magical family celebration really looks like," Hermione added. "I understand now why Harry is such a special person. He learned from the best." Later, as Harry settled into his own bed for the first time in months, he reflected on the perfect balance he seemed to have achieved. Tomorrow they would return to Hogwarts, where he would continue his magical education and face whatever challenges the second half of his first year might bring. But he would do so with the absolute certainty that he was loved, supported, and understood by the people who mattered most. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, returning to complete his first year at Hogwarts. But more importantly, he was Harry Tonks, beloved son and brother, carrying the values of family, friendship, and love into whatever adventures lay ahead. And that, he thought as he drifted off to sleep in his childhood bedroom, was exactly who he was meant to be. Chapter 12. Spring Foundations. March arrived at Hogwarts with the promise of longer days and the gradual warming that marked winter's retreat. Harry returned from Christmas holidays with a renewed sense of confidence that seemed to radiate from him like a subtle charm. His time at home had reinforced everything he valued about family, friendship, and the person he was becoming. "You look different," Hermione observed as they sat in the library, working through their defense against the dark arts essays. "More settled." "I feel settled," Harry replied, considering the observation seriously. "Being home reminded me of who I am and where I belong. It's easier to handle the challenges here when I know I have that foundation to return to." Ron looked up from his own essay, which was notably longer and more thoughtful than his usual efforts. The Christmas holiday with the Tonks family had affected him as well, giving him new perspectives on what family relationships could look like. "My mum's letters have been different too," Ron said quietly. "More personal, I suppose. I think watching your family made me realize what I've been missing at home." The spring term had indeed brought changes for all three friends, but perhaps none more significant than the growing rumors about strange incidents occurring within the castle. Students whispered about teachers acting oddly, about restricted areas being more heavily guarded than usual, and about something valuable being hidden somewhere in the school. "Do you think it's connected to the increased security measures Dora mentioned?" Hermione asked during one of their evening study sessions. Harry had been wondering the same thing. His sister's casual comments during Christmas about heightened protective measures had taken on new significance as the term progressed. Teachers seemed more watchful, certain corridors were suddenly off-limits, and there was a tension in the castle that hadn't been present during the autumn term. The mystery deepened when Professor Quirrell began exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. His usual nervous stammering had escalated to something approaching paranoia, and Harry noticed that the professor seemed to avoid looking directly at him during defense classes. "There's something wrong with Quirrell," Harry confided to his friends one evening as they made their way back from dinner. "He flinches every time he sees me, and yesterday I could have sworn he was muttering to himself in the corridor." "Maybe he's just stressed about something," Ron suggested, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Their speculation was interrupted by the sound of rapid footsteps behind them. They turned to see Professor McGonagall approaching with an expression of grim determination. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger," she said briskly, "I need to speak with you immediately. Please come with me." They followed her through the castle corridors with growing anxiety, finally arriving at her office where she turned to face them with obvious concern. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said without preamble. "We have reason to believe that someone is planning to steal an extremely valuable and dangerous object that has been placed under our protection this year. We also have reason to believe that this person may attempt to use Mr. Potter to accomplish their goal." Harry felt his stomach drop. "Use me how?" "Your fame makes you a potential target for manipulation or coercion," McGonagall explained. "Someone might attempt to convince you to help them access restricted areas of the castle, or they might try to threaten people you care about to ensure your cooperation." The three friends exchanged worried glances. This was exactly the kind of danger that Dora's security concerns had been designed to prevent. "What do you need us to do?" Hermione asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Be vigilant. Report any unusual behavior or suspicious requests immediately. And Mr. Potter," McGonagall's gaze fixed on Harry with particular intensity, "if anyone approaches you with claims about your parents, your heritage, or your destiny, you are to inform a teacher immediately. Do not attempt to handle such situations on your own." The warning proved prophetic. 3 days later, Harry found himself face-to-face with Professor Quirrell in an empty classroom, the professor's nervous demeanor replaced by something cold and calculating. "Mr. Potter," Quirrell said, his voice unnaturally steady, "how fortunate to find you alone." Harry immediately felt the warning signs that Dora had taught him to recognize, the prickle of danger, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with this interaction. Instead of responding, he took a careful step backward toward the door. "Professor Quirrell," he said politely but firmly, "I was just heading to the library. Perhaps we could speak later." "I'm afraid not," Quirrell replied, and his voice carried an undertone that made Harry's magical senses recoil. "You see, there's something I need, and you're going to help me get it." But Harry was no longer the isolated, desperate child that Quirrell might have expected. He was a young man who had been raised with love, taught to recognize danger, and trained to respond to threats strategically rather than emotionally. "I don't think so," Harry said calmly, and activated the emergency protocol Dora had taught him. His hand found the mirror in his pocket as he spoke. "Dora," he said quietly but clearly. The effect was immediate. Quirrell's expression shifted to one of surprise and growing alarm as he realized that Harry was not alone and defenseless. "Clever," came a cold voice that seemed to emanate from Quirrell himself, though his lips barely moved. "But not clever enough." What followed was a brief but intense magical confrontation that demonstrated exactly how well Harry's unconventional education had prepared him for real danger. Instead of panicking or attempting to fight alone, he used every defensive technique Dora had taught him while calling for help through both the mirror and his voice. When Professor Dumbledore arrived moments later, accompanied by Dora and Professor McGonagall, they found Harry standing calmly over an unconscious Quirrell, his wand steady and his breathing controlled. "Are you all right, Harry?" Dora asked. Immediately, her aura training evident in how quickly she assessed the situation for ongoing threats. "I'm fine," Harry replied honestly. Professor Quirrell tried to coerce me into helping him with something, but he seemed different, like someone else was speaking through him. Dumbledore's expression grew grave as he knelt beside the unconscious professor. Indeed, he said quietly. This explains a great deal. Later that evening, as Harry sat in Dumbledore's office giving his account of the incident, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Harry, Dumbledore said gently, I owe you an apology. Harry looked up in surprise. For what, Professor? For underestimating you. For assuming that your upbringing with the Tonks family might have made you softer, perhaps, less prepared for the realities of the magical world. Dumbledore's blue eyes held a mixture of regret and admiration. Instead, I see that they have given you something far more valuable than hardship ever could, the wisdom to recognize genuine danger and the emotional stability to respond effectively. They taught me that love makes you stronger, not weaker, Harry said simply, and that asking for help isn't the same as being helpless. Precisely. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, studying Harry with obvious reassessment. Tell me, Harry, are you grateful for the placement that took you from Privet Drive to the Tonks family? The question was clearly important, though Harry wasn't entirely sure why. More grateful than I can express, Harry said without hesitation. They gave me everything: love, guidance, education, family. They taught me who I am and what matters. I can't imagine what my life would have been like without them. And you have no regrets about missing the character-building experiences that hardship might have provided? Harry considered this seriously. I think the character-building I received from love and stability was far more valuable than anything I could have learned from suffering. I'm brave because I want to protect people I care about, not because I'm desperate to prove myself. I'm confident because I know I'm loved, not because I need external validation. And I'm willing to fight against evil because I understand the value of good, not because I've been victimized by it. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of wonder. You are quite right, my boy. Quite right indeed. The Tonks family has given you something I failed to understand the value of, the strength that comes from being unconditionally loved. The end of term arrived with the usual mixture of exhaustion and excitement that marked the completion of a successful academic year. Harry's first year at Hogwarts had exceeded every expectation, both his own and others. He had excelled academically, formed genuine friendships, successfully navigated the complexities of his dual identity, and proven himself capable of handling genuine danger with wisdom rather than recklessness. As he packed his trunk for the journey home, Harry reflected on how much he had grown since that nervous September morning when he had first walked through the barrier at platform 9 3/4. He was still Harry Potter, the boy who lived, but he was also still Harry Tonks, beloved son and brother. The two identities no longer felt like separate parts of himself. They had integrated into a complete sense of who he was and who he wanted to become. The train ride home was filled with animated conversation about summer plans and the anticipation of second year. Ron would be spending July with his family in Romania, visiting Charlie and his dragons. Hermione planned to travel through France with her parents, visiting magical historical sites alongside Muggle tourist attractions. And Harry would be home with his family, continuing his magical education through private study and practical training. Dora's arranged to take some of her summer leave to work with me on advanced defensive magic, Harry explained to his friends as the countryside rolled past their compartment window. Apparently my performance during the Quirrell incident impressed her supervisors enough that they've approved specialized training for students with my particular circumstances. That's brilliant, Hermione said with obvious envy. Private aura training during summer holidays. You'll be years ahead of the curriculum when we return. We'll all be ahead, Harry said firmly. I'll share everything I learn with both of you. That's what friends do. The reunion at King's Cross Station was everything Harry had hoped for. His family's faces lit up with joy and relief as he stepped off the train, and the embrace that followed seemed to melt away the months of separation in an instant. "Welcome home, sweetheart," Andromeda said, holding him tightly. "We missed you terribly." "I missed you too," Harry replied, and meant it with every fibre of his being. "But I'm home now." The drive back to the cottage was filled with questions and stories, updates on family news, and eager inquiries about the term's adventures. Harry found himself able to share even the frightening parts of his experience with confidence, knowing that his family would understand both his challenges and his growth. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table sharing dinner and conversation, Ted made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been thinking about our future plans," he said, his tone carrying the weight of important decisions. "And I believe it's time we made some changes to better support Harry's unique educational needs." "What kind of changes?" Dora asked with interest. "I'd like to renovate the old barn," Ted explained. "Turn it into a proper magical training facility, somewhere Harry can practice advanced magic safely, where you can conduct defensive training without worrying about ministry detection, and where we can host other young people who might benefit from additional educational support." Harry felt his breath catch. "You'd do that? For me?" "For all of us," Andromeda corrected gently. "Harry, you're not the only young person in the magical world who could benefit from a stable, loving environment for learning and growth. We've seen how much Ron and Hermione flourished during their time here at Christmas. There are other children who could use similar support. A proper training center," Dora said thoughtfully, "with professional-grade defensive equipment and safety measures. I could get approval from the ministry to conduct official training sessions here." The conversation continued long into the evening as they planned and dreamed about the possibilities. By the time they settled down for the night, Harry felt as though he was bursting with excitement and gratitude. Later, as he lay in his childhood bedroom, looking out at the garden where he had taken his first steps and learned his first spells, Harry reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been simply Harry Tonks, beloved son preparing for an unknown magical future. Now he was Harry Potter Tonks, confident young wizard with a clear sense of his identity and purpose. The following morning brought a special surprise. Ted emerged from his workshop carrying a large, wrapped object that he set carefully on the kitchen table. "What's this?" Harry asked curiously. "Open it and see," Ted said with a mysterious smile. Harry unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful wooden picture frame containing a family portrait, unlike any he had ever seen. The photograph showed the four of them: Andromeda, Ted, Dora, and Harry, standing in their garden with arms around each other, all smiling with obvious love and contentment. But this wasn't a static Muggle photograph. The magical image moved and shifted, showing different moments and expressions, capturing the full warmth and joy of their family bond. "When did you take this?" Harry asked, studying the image with wonder. "I've been taking pictures all year," Ted explained. "Every time you were home, every letter you sent, every story you shared. I wanted to capture not just how you look, but how you belong." Harry felt tears prick his eyes as he watched the image cycle through moments of laughter, conversation, and quiet affection. This wasn't just a photograph. It was a testament to the love that had shaped him and would continue to support him through whatever adventures lay ahead. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for taking me in, for raising me, for making me part of this family, for teaching me that I could be both Harry Potter and Harry Tonks, and that both parts of me are valuable." "Thank you," Andromeda replied, "for letting us be your family, for bringing Ron and Hermione into our lives, for showing us that love multiplies when it's shared rather than divided." As summer stretched ahead of them, filled with plans for magical training, family adventures, and the ongoing work of building a safe space for young magical people to learn and grow, Harry felt a deep contentment settle around him, like a protective charm. He was exactly who he was meant to be. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and Harry Tonks, the boy who had learned that being loved unconditionally was the greatest magic of all. And with his family beside him and his future full of possibility, he was ready for whatever adventures the magical world might hold. The story of Harry Potter was far from over. But this chapter, the foundation chapter, built on love and family and the courage to be authentically yourself, was complete. And it was exactly the beginning